Good afternoon, everyone. We may wait a couple more minutes, but what I wanted to say is we are not going to get, if you're here for the BRFA, we're not going to get to that for probably at least half an hour, 45 minutes. And we're going to take all the other bills first. So if you're here for the BRFA and you want to take a walk or whatever, feel free. Stay here too if you like, but that's where things are. We got 9 bills today. We're going to take the 8 bills before the BRFA. And we'll get started in just about a minute. All right. Since Senator Jackson's here, we can get started now. Yeah. All right, Madam Comptroller. We're going to start with Senate Bill 1105.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the Budget and Taxation Committee, it's great to be here with you again. I think for the final time, thank you for having me. Brooke Learman, Comptroller of Maryland, to speak about SB 1105. This is a very simple bill, but very important to us, and I think to Maryland taxpayers as well. Our bill is really just to create an education and awareness fund to ensure that Marylanders know that they are eligible for important individual tax credits when they file their taxes each year. So one of the key tools that the General Assembly has and what our government has and what it can use to uplift low and moderate income working Marylanders is the tax code. And throughout many sessions, many of which I was a member of this body, the General Assembly passed critical tax credits, including the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Child Independent Care Tax Credit, and the Senior Tax Credit, and more. Well, these tax credits are designed specifically to support our low and moderate income Marylanders, but unfortunately, many people who are eligible for them are not aware that they are eligible for them and do not claim them. In essence, we want to close the gap between those who are eligible for these tax credits and those who actually claim them. And the reason that that is so important is because these tax credits they actually work. They helped lift people out of poverty. Last year, I met a young woman who went to the cash campaign for assistance filing her taxes, had never known that she was eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit before, had never heard of it before. She claimed it. She was able to then take classes at a community college. And today she makes too much money to earn the Earned Income Tax Credit. So that is a success story, right? She has more than paid back what she got in the Earned Income Tax Credit. And that is why it's so important that we let people know about these programs. So I want to highlight one specific about the EITC, the underutilization. But this underutilization also extends to other tax credits. So according to the IRS, nationwide, approximately 1 in 5 taxpayers eligible for the EITC fails to claim it. Between 2013 and 2020, somewhere between 21 and 26% of eligible Maryland taxpayers did not claim the federal EITC. And therefore, we don't think they claimed the state EITC either. In recent years, Maryland has topped out around 78% of utilization rate of the federal EITC and then also the state EITC. So to put that in real numbers, we think there are close to 150,000 Marylanders that are leaving money on the table because they don't know that they qualify for these credits. So I won't go through all the math on all the tax credits, but we believe even just for the senior tax credit, that over 100,000 seniors are not taking advantage of the senior tax credit either. So this work really builds on past goals of the General Assembly, specifically HB 252 from 2022, which directed the Office of the Comptroller to create a streamlined way to claim the EITC. The bill before you today actually provides the support necessary to allow us to do the outreach to close the claimant gap. And while this would be new for Maryland, it's not a new concept because many other states actually do this. California has allocated $20 million for outreach around tax credits. Let me say that again, $20 million. Illinois has also been leading the way on this effort to do streamlined methods of outreach for the EITC, and using a method that we would love to emulate, they actually close the gap by 50%. Many of our state agencies engage in awareness and education campaigns about important topics. You've seen MDOT's Be the Driver campaign, the Department of Health Stop Overdoses, Maryland Tourism Development's Open to It campaign, Move Over Maryland, DOL had a Maryland Work Sharing campaign, MDH had Connecting to Hope, and more. So while our outreach would be significantly more data-driven and targeted, and part of the campaign would provide guidance on how to access the credit, this bill is just like that, making sure that people know what they are eligible for. So I encourage you to provide a favorable report on HB 845 to allow our agency to access the resources that we need to ensure we can close the gap between those who are eligible for essential tax credits and those who actually claim them. Thank you.
Whoever would like to start on your panel?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, Senators, it's good to see you this afternoon. I am the Reverend Kobe Little, President of the Maryland State Conference of the NAACP. I am super delighted to sit next to our hardworking comptroller this afternoon and offer the NAACP's support for Senate Bill 1105. As the comptroller has already mentioned, we see this measure as the last piece of the Earned Income Tax Credit initiatives that will allow people to know what they're eligible for. Really, this legislation attempts to address an economic security issue. And by empowering people in our state with information, many more Marylanders can take advantage of all of the tax credits that they are eligible for. We're grateful to the Maryland General Assembly for the work that it has done in the past to create these tax credits. Now it's time to allocate resources to get the word out about these tax credits. And so we urge a favorable report on this legislation, Senate Bill 1105. Thank you.
My name is Paul Schwartz, State Legislation Chair for the National Active and Retired Federal Employees. I have testified before this committee on numerous occasions, too many instances to keep track, but almost always I testified to seek a tax credit, whether for stemming senior migration to tax-friendly states or encouraging the purchase of long-term care insurance. This time I testify in support of a bill, SB 1105, which simply seeks to implement the campaign to identify and encourage individuals to apply for certain already existing tax credits for which they are eligible, but fail for whatever reason to claim. In other words, if eligible, it's their money we are looking to give them. When you pass the initial legislation creating the tax credit, whether it's EITC or a senior tax credit, you did so for good reason. Not to pass this bill, therefore, undermines your own purpose in passing the initial bills. We consistently hear about how overly complicated our income tax system is and how we need to streamline it. Here is an opportunity to help some individuals who may have become victims of that complicated system. We have an outstanding controller in Brooke Learman, as evidenced by the fact that she is trying to modernize the controller's office and not use its antiquated office as an excuse for not doing what needs to be done. Let's help her do what needs to be done for those who need her help. And let's give a favorable report to SB 1105. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, my name is Robin McKinney. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Cash Campaign of Maryland. Cash stands for Creating Assets, Savings, and Hope, and we promote economic advancement for low to moderate income individuals in Baltimore City and across the state. We do free tax preparation. Happy tax season if you're not a person who celebrates. More than
Everyone should be
everyone should be celebrating. It's not just a Hallmark holiday, just to be clear. More than half of our clients earn less than $20,000, with many earning less than $10,000. We're here in strong support and thank the comptroller for bringing SB 1105 forward. Having an awareness campaign is really important. The EITC turns over and the child tax credit each year is because people become newly eligible. Years ago, you guys might remember from the Tax Credit Evaluation Act that about every 3 years, there are new people coming in. So we're constantly having to let people know that they're eligible. So this is something that needs to really be a standing effort. We support this bill because it increases participation and puts money back in the pockets of low to moderate income households. We saw during the pandemic a real stark drop off of people, particularly between 2019 and 2020. We're still actually getting caught up on some people trying to file their taxes from the pandemic. And so letting people know that they could be eligible for these credits actually drives compliance because lots of folks who may be scared to come and file because it's been a couple years, if they know that there could be a tax credit they're waiting for them, that would actually increase their compliance. So having dedicated funding for targeted outreach will really help the comptroller's office, again, to do a data-driven approach. We, as a standalone nonprofit, and all of our partners in the state work really hard to do this, but to have a partner in government is incredibly welcome and will help us to do this at scale. So with that, we urge a favorable report on SB 1105.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. My name is Callie Shumitz. I'm with the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. And we have been before this committee many times in the past supporting past expansions that helped strengthen the state earned income tax credit, create our child tax credit. And we're proud to have done that in partnership with this committee. But these powerful anti-poverty tax credits can only do what they're intended to do and help families make ends meet if people receive them. So that's why we're here today in support of SB 1105 as the next step towards that goal. About 1 in 4 Marylanders who are eligible for the federal EITC don't receive it, according to IRS data. And while we don't have exactly equivalent data for state level tax credits, we know that these tax credits are reaching similar populations, and we believe that there are tens of thousands of Marylanders missing out on these tax credits every year. And that not only means that those families are missing out on funds that can help them afford rent or food or other basic needs, it also means that those dollars are not benefiting our economy. Families who are living paycheck to paycheck tend to quickly spend the money that they receive through these tax credits at local businesses. So we really see this as a modest investment of state resources that could yield millions of dollars coming back to our economy, to Maryland families and to local businesses. SB 1105 will provide the comptroller's office new tools as well to help identify people who are eligible for these tax credits and so they can receive what they're owed. So for those reasons, we ask for a favorable report on SB 1105.
Thank you. Any questions for this panel? Yes.
Thank you. I'm all for it, but why do you need the law? Why do you need legislation? Why can't you just do this?
We need the money.
Well, it's the money. No, that's a serious question. So it's just the money.
No, I mean, this is a money issue. We would love to, we can do this work. We don't, we have the data, we can do it.
Data sharing and all that stuff.
And the reason that, I think Robin also articulated well why it should be an ongoing expense, because we turn people over so frequently that we have to keep letting people know.
I'm buying the value proposition, but you have the authority to exchange information with the other agencies already.
Yes, there is a small piece of this. We'll make sure that we have the data authority, but really this bill is about the money.
Okay, thank you. Thank
Yep.
you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Testimony on that bill. Senator Quarterman, Senator Reedy said he needed to bump you, so.
I guess this bill's gonna die, huh? I was just minding my own business in my committee, I assure you. Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Budget and Taxation Committee, as amended, I'm here, Senator Reedy here to present Senate Bill 963. As amended, it would prohibit Carroll County Office of Permits and Inspections from issuing or renewing a license or permit till the applicant provides satisfactory evidence that there are no unpaid assessed property taxes for the business. In the fall, this past fall, our Carroll County Board of Commissioners approved this policy in an effort to collect delinquent taxes, but we had to come to here to the General Assembly for approval on it. Currently, the county doesn't have an efficient or effective mechanisms to hold businesses responsible for unpaid property taxes. And so businesses can continue to operate without penalty for failure to pay this tax. The only option right now is for the county attorney's office to pursue a court proceeding, which can be slow and pretty expensive to deal with this kind of issue. So we're asking for approval for this bill and would appreciate your favorable support. I do have Mr. Fowler here from representing the Carroll County Board of Commissioners. I don't know if you have any testimony or just.
Just want to say that to make sure there's no confusion, I should say Mike Fowler representing the commissioners. The bill was originally drafted incorrectly. It said that a business seeking a permit would have to provide documentation that its taxes were paid. That's not the intent. The intent is that when a business comes in for a permit or license or renewal, that we will check to see if those personal property taxes have been paid. If not, we'll deny the permit. If the applicant can provide documentation that the assessment is in dispute, we will go ahead and issue the permit. And if the permit is denied and they return to us with documentation that the personal property taxes are paid, we will issue the permit.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, Senator Corman.
Senator-
Wow, it was quick.
Senator Corman.
All right. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, for the record, Paul Quarterman, representing District 2, Washington and Frederick counties. Thank you for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 1076, Sales and Use Tax to charge electrical vehicles, Transportation Trust Fund. So, colleagues, we talk a lot about the challenges that the increase of electric vehicles has put on our Transportation Trust Fund. This bill has identified some current revenue that, in my opinion, hopefully the committee's opinion, should be in the trust fund as opposed to the general fund. So right now, we have commercial charging stations all across the state. I'm sure you guys have all seen them at our shopping centers and places like that. And when a vehicle utilizes these charging stations, they're currently charged a sales and use tax. Now, currently that tax just goes into the general fund. However, this legislation would require the comptroller to distribute it to the Transportation Trust Fund so that it's attributed, so that the tax attributed to the sale of electricity is used at these charging stations into the trust fund for our roads. So I think there's a little bit of a confusion here as far as the intent of the bill and some of the letters of opposition. This is not a new tax. It's not an increase to the tax. The tax is already being collected. There's already sales and use tax that's collected on these charging stations. It's just a redistribution, so to speak, of where that revenue goes. As opposed to just going to the general fund, it would go into the Transportation Trust Fund. So I think it only makes sense that that tax collected from the EV would go to the trust fund. Allocating these funds would contribute to the Transportation Trust Fund, providing more revenue to ensure opportunities for roads and bridges. So anyways, that's the long and short of it. Appreciate any questions and hope for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the Senator? Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to, I'm sorry. Yeah,
Senator,
sure.
Senator,
Yes,
how much money on an average goes to the general fund?
So that's a great question, Senator. And so the comptroller's office, we've been in contact with them. They are having a hard time tracking down actually what that number is, because the sales and use tax, they can't really tell us right now. So that's a great question, and we're trying to identify that actual number. Their only response has been, we don't really track it. It goes in the general fund. We don't know how much it is or how little it is, which to me is a problem in and of itself that we need to kind of rectify also. So, yep.
So how can we find out about that, Mr. Chair?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably just gonna take a little time. They may not have a way of metering it yet, but they'll, I'm sure, figure it out.
That's kind of where this discussion has led to us to this point. That's kind of where we're
Yeah.
at with it. So, yep, no, great question. You're right.
Right. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Sure, thank you. Okay, we are moving on to 1092, and I have a panel. They want to come up. Dr. Scalia and others. So this is not a new issue to this committee. We obviously last year took some steps to help with our trauma and emergency medical system. We put money into MSOF, directed some specific money to the park, the main shock trauma center in Baltimore. And we also put money into a fund that was used by the physicians fund to support our trauma centers around the state to ensure that on-call physicians have the funding to provide those services. And it's really those three component parts, the park, MSOF in general, and all the other trauma centers around the state that this bill is addressing. And it's all about funding, and that's what we do. And we know that the system is extraordinary, and we know that we need to maintain it. And the plan here, I believe, will do so for a considerable period of time into the future. And that's where we're going. I will tell you that already we've noticed a couple interesting things in the fiscal note. I think there were some calculations that we made prior to that are different now about number of registered vehicles. This is all about adding to the your registration fee to ensure that all these services continue at the highest level. We're gonna have to work with some of those numbers as we move forward, but that is essentially where this bill is. And with that, I will ask our panel to move to give us some information.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Ted Delbridge, the Executive Director for MEMS, the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services, an independent state agency. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and Senators of the committee. For 3 decades, Marylanders have funded the infrastructure of their statewide emergency medical services system through a surcharge on motor vehicle registration fees. The revenue from those fees comprised 98% of the Maryland EMS Operations Fund, or MEMSOF. The MEMSOF funds nearly all the budgets for MEMS and the Maryland Fire Rescue Institute, and approximately 80% for the Maryland State Police Aviation Command. It provides modest support for the R. Adams Cali Shock Trauma Center and generates the Senator William Amos Fund, resulting in grants to counties as they pursue improvements to their fire, rescue, and EMS services. As an important ancillary benefit, the MEMSOF and the partnerships it necessitates creates a unity of mission and synergy that last year collectively certified or licensed nearly 20,000 EMS clinicians, trained more than 26,000 firefighters and EMTs, responded to nearly 2,000 medevac missions, and cared for more than 5,000 of the most critically injured Marylanders. In fact, last year, Maryland's EMS system responded to approximately 1 million calls for help and conveyed more than 558,000 hurt and ill people to hospital emergency departments, including 25,000 seriously injured people to one of 10 Maryland trauma centers designated by MEMS. The surcharge that supports the MEMSOF has not been updated since 2013. However, the expenses the MSOF covers escalate every year, resulting merely from inflation and the cost of doing business. The same is true of the Maryland Trauma Physician Services Fund, which helps to ensure the perpetual state of readiness trauma centers must maintain. Its revenue source hasn't been updated in 20 years. Senate Bill 1092 accomplishes several important things. It updates the motor vehicle registration surcharge, providing funding for the MSOF that results in its solvency beyond 10 years from now. It provides needed financial resources for the Trauma Physician Services Fund, helping to close the gap in what it takes to be ready at each trauma center for the next injured Marylander. And it enhances the support provided to the state's primary adult resource center for trauma so they can continue to do the extraordinary work that saves lives every day. For these reasons, we support Senate Bill 1092 and hope for a favorable report. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Scalea from the Shock Trauma Center. For the last 50 years, Marylanders have had access to the finest trauma care available anywhere in the world. But the system only works if all components operate at their highest level. Now, the R. Adams College Shock Trauma Center is a core element of this system. We serve as the state's primary adult resource center, the PARC, for the treatment of trauma. We are the state's primary adult trauma center, the statewide referral center for the treatment of head, spinal cord, and multiple injuries, the regional trauma center for Region 3 and for the Southwest quadrant of Baltimore City, and the statewide referral center for patients in need of hyperbaric medical treatment. The R. Adams College Shock Trauma Center is the only freestanding hospital trauma center in the nation, serving over 6,500 patients annually. It serves as a vital statewide clinical resource and uniquely maintains an around-the-clock state of readiness in its dedicated trauma resuscitation unit, operating rooms, recovery rooms, and beds. The facility and staff are organized for on-demand access and treatment of the state's most critically ill and injured patients to a degree unparalleled anywhere else. The MIMS Park designation represents the highest level of capability and readiness for the delivery of trauma in the United States. It is the only hospital designated at a level above level 1. Let me emphasize, all of the shock trauma resources are at the ready and dedicated to trauma. There is no mission creep. Now, we are extremely grateful for the additional $5 million that the legislators provided to supplement the shock trauma center's standby costs in 24, as well as our share of the added $9.5 million allocated to support the trauma system. But despite these additional funds, the Shock Trauma Center continues to face unprecedented financial challenges. Let me give you an example. We have 9 operating rooms, but we only have staff to run 6. That means despite operating well into the evening on cases that are not emergent, on average of 4 to 6 patients don't get the surgery they need and were scheduled for that day. That increases length of stay, decreases our ability to get transfers in, and a third of our patients, about 2,000, come to us from other hospitals, 1/3 of them from other trauma centers. The system only works if the door is open. Now, today I got to the hospital early and I looked at the board and was pleasantly surprised. We're running 6 rooms. We only had about 15 cases on. I said, this is a good day. By 10 in the morning, we had added 4 emergencies, 1 gunshot wound to the head, 1 patient in terrible septic shock, needing both hyperbaric oxygen and surgery, and 2 patients that had developed complications on the floor. That was by 10:30 in the morning. The day didn't look so good anymore. And it will continue through this afternoon. We should have invested more in prevention so that in the future, the rate of injury to the population eventually decreases. We also need to invest more in quality and education programs. We want to do those. We are mandated to do those, but none of that is currently funded through trauma rates or through support from the trauma fund. For the last 27 years, I've been privileged to run the Shock Trauma Center. All I have ever asked for, all my staff has ever asked for, is enough resources to take care of Maryland. There's always been a close relationship between the legislature the trauma system, and the trauma center. And we again ask you to vote in support of saving lives. We strongly support Senate Bill 1092.
Chairman, members of the committee, Ben Steffen, Executive Director of the Maryland Healthcare Commission, and I, along with Dr. Delbridge, served over the summer and fall on the Commission for Trauma Funding, along with Senator Alfred. The Healthcare Commission strongly supports this legislation. I would note that there are other bills that are working their way through the House as well. But first off, this is the bill that is, I think, the top line piece of legislation because it sets a threshold of additional funding that would be made available to the trauma system broadly, including shock trauma, MEMSOF, and the Maryland Trauma Physicians Fund, all of which over the course of the Trauma Commission meetings were identified as having needs. I want to focus specifically on the other 9 trauma centers. Dr. Scalia did an excellent job of describing needs at shock trauma. We need to see this as a system. All of the trauma centers play a key roles. The Maryland Trauma Physician Fund, although it does fund a portion of cost for shock trauma, a small portion. This fund is key and critical to the other 9 trauma centers operating in the state. House Bill 1439 provides some additional specificity on how those funds would be allocated, and it's important that the Senate Budget and Tax Committee consider those carefully because we really need to pair them together as we move forward. But this is extremely important because it sets that top line number on the amount of funding that is going to be needed across the system. And that's the key point here, that we can't have a partial system in Maryland. Each of these trauma centers plays a key role. The commission, as well as its sister agencies at HSCRC and at MIMS, are committed to working together should the Senate and House act to change regulations so that we can move forward. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Phillips. I am the legislative chair for the Maryland State Firefighters Association. We represent about 25,000 plus fire and EMS people across the volunteers across this state. I'm here to speak in favor of and support of Senate Bill 1092. Thank you, Senator Gazzoni, for bringing this forward and your introduction of it. I won't go through all that. You did such a great job. Everybody to my right has talked about all the facts and figures. I'll just talk about the MEMSOF partnership. There's 5 partners in that group. We all work together. We have a unique situation across this nation that other states only envy because we do work together. The MSFA is in support of this. We ask for your support to keep this partnership together, doing the unique job that it does as well as it does for the citizens and guests of the state of Maryland. We ask for your favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Michael Cox. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Fire Rescue Institute. The Fire Rescue Institute is the state's comprehensive training and education system for all of our emergency providers. So as you can see, I don't have much of a voice today, and in the sake of time, I don't want to repeat anything that my partners up here have said. I'm going to pull the Me Too out and use that today, and just wanted to come in person, though, to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee for working on this important issue so we can maintain the best system in the nation. Thank you.
Questions for this panel? Thank you all very much. Okay. We have several other folks signed up. Jennifer Witten, Danny Westerman. And then I have a couple people who are signed up favorable with amendment, and they're welcome also to come up. Jennifer Fritzen, Kevin Canale, whoever would like to start.
Great. I'll go ahead, Mr. Chairman. Jennifer Witten here today, representing Sinai Hospital. We are here in support of this bill. We thank the chairman and Senator Elfrith for all their support in really listening to the deliberation over the last year and really being a champion for our trauma system. Just real quick, Sinai Hospital is a level 2 trauma facility. We have the privilege of serving a little less than 3,000 patients a year who unfortunately experience trauma and are able to take care of them. We also run an acute care hospital. What we would ask this committee is, as you work through the many pieces of legislation to support the system, we are a system. And if one of us fails, we all fail. We really do need the support of all the centers, shock trauma, EMS, and all the other providers that are involved in delivering the care 24/7. So we'd ask the committee for careful consideration on how you allocate the funding and the flexibility of accessing the fund. So thank you again for this consideration. And of course, we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Chair Guzzani and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to speak in favor of SB 1092. I am Danny Westerban, the Medical Director of Trauma Services at Suburban Hospital, the Level 2 designated trauma center in Montgomery County. I started practicing at Suburban well before the creation of the Maryland Trauma Physician Services Fund in 2003. Since then, the surcharge was never increased, even though the demand for trauma services and the cost associated with trauma care have steadily increased. At my center, for instance, trauma cases have increased 41% over the levels we experienced before the pandemic, while the number of falls and motor vehicle crashes has remained the same. We are unfortunately seeing many more penetrating injuries from knife and gun violence. In a level 2 trauma center, there is always a surgeon and an anesthesiologist on site and on standby. Many other specialists, such as those in neurosurgery, orthopedics, urology, maxillofacial surgery, are on call, but they must always be ready to report to the trauma center within 30 to 45 minutes when they are called in. There is a cost associated with this continuous high-level readiness. At Suburban, for example, related cost for on-call readiness rose 33% over the last 2 years. Increasing the amount of money available in the Trauma Physicians Services Fund will certainly allow Suburban and all other hospitals in the system to compensate the skilled physicians and surgeons who help make Maryland an exemplary place for trauma care. This additional funding for MEMSOF will also increase the capacity of our colleagues in the fire rescue service to better care for patients in the field before arriving to our trauma resuscitation units. I urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 1092. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide testimony in favor of Senate Bill 1092 with amendment. My name is Jen Fritzine. I am the Trauma and Burn Program Manager at Children's National Medical Center. Senate Bill 1092 really does take an important step towards financially supporting the entire Maryland trauma system. And despite being in Washington, D.C., Children's National does play a vital role to taking care of the trauma patients, children in the state of Maryland. We are one of 2 level 1 pediatric trauma centers that serve the children of Maryland. And as a result, being in Washington, D.C., we have received $590,000 annually from the Maryland Trauma Physician Service Fund. Since the last fund increase in 2008, our trauma volume have surged 17 to 20%. In 2022 alone, fund As an integral part of the Maryland trauma system, in its final report, the commission recommended an annual funding to Children's National increase from the $590,000 per year to $900,000 for that uncompensated care that we're able to provide the children of Maryland for our on-call costs that are associated with our trauma readiness. Consistent with the commission's recommendations, we've offered an amendment to increase Children's National annual funding for the Maryland Trauma Physician Service Fund to at least $900,000. We applaud the Maryland General Assembly for creating the commission to study the Trauma Center Fund and for introducing the legislation, which is essential for the Maryland trauma system to continue to deliver exceptional high quality and timely care to trauma patients across the state. For these reasons, we urge a favorable support on Senate Bill 1092 with the stated amendment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in strong support of this bill. I remember back at our summer conference, we held a session on this issue. And as always, I was extremely impressed with Dr. Scalia, his team, and everything that they do. It certainly benefits our shared constituents. So I first want to say that this is a great bill. We don't want to touch anything in this bill. We don't want to touch any of the funding mechanisms or where they go. I will say Senator Augustine has a bill all about recruitment and retention. That's also a problem here in the state for both career and volunteer firefighters. So what we would ask the committee to do is to please consider increasing this bump just a little bit and putting it into a fund outside of MSOF, because what we're trying to do is create a scholarship program for firefighters, career and volunteer, again, to help with recruitment and retention. So I know this is a creative committee. I know money is tight, but we think this is a good mechanism. It's unlikely that we're probably going to come back to this fee anytime soon. And so we feel like there's an opportunity here to fix both of these issues and help our career and volunteer firefighters retain and recruit employees. So again, I want to be very clear. We don't want to touch this bill, any of the funding mechanisms. We don't want to touch the MSOF fund, but we would like you to please consider bumping it up a little bit, putting it outside of MSOF and trying to fund a scholarship program to help with recruitment and retention. And with that, we'd ask for a favorable report with that amendment.
Questions for this panel? Thank you all very much. Unless I've missed someone, I think that's concludes that bill. Okay. So the next bill would have been Senator McKay's bill, but he's stuck up in another committee right now. So we're going to move on to Senate Bill 973, which is another one of mine. You're going to get used to hearing that.
You get your look.
Yes. I think I just have one person maybe from the Maryland Hospital Association who's here for this. Yes. Yes. So I've talked to the committee about this bill before. This is part of my sort of concept of being when we're receiving so many requests from hospitals all across the state for various programs and projects, the ability of the committee to, from a medical perspective, make judgments on what should come first or not. The program has existed with the Maryland Hospital Association for years, although it hasn't been codified. This bill would codify it and also suggest a higher level of funding. It's been running around $8 million, which the requests we've been getting have far exceeded that, and sets it at 20 million. Of course, it's not a mandate, going along with everything we've been doing over the last year. And that's essentially it. And we have Jane.
Yes. Perfect. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Jane Krinke. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Hospital Association in strong support of this legislation. We're really grateful to the chairman for proposing it. Capital funding is critical for our hospitals, and it's hard to come by. Over the years, MHA has been a steward of this program since the 90s when it was first brought together. And we've had consistently great projects. In most recent years, the vast majority have been around behavioral health and ED renovations, given the increase in the acuity of patients we're seeing in our hospitals. The bill as written codifies the program as we have it. It gives us enough flexibility to ensure that we can craft it to have the peer review process that we have in place now. And so we really appreciate the flexibility in the bill and the increase in funding. With that increase, we think we can get more hospital projects coming through our program. You know, having a mix of innovative projects and those that are vital, like updating an OR, things like that. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving right along, we're going to go to 1065. And I'm going to ask, I think I have a couple people here for this bill. It's also one of mine. They want to come up and have a seat at the table. So we've also had a lot of discussion. The next two bills are really about discussions that have been going on over the interim. We had a commission that was formed to deal with transportation issues, and it's no secret that revenues have been down, in particular because of changes in the way people drive, in a way, in part because the increase of EVs, electric vehicles, and because of that, and actually some significant needs that we have for transportation as we look out into the future. The commission actually made recommendations on in two areas in terms of raising revenues. The commission, of course, is just this was part of their interim report, and I served on the commission as well as several other legislators. There'll be another report that comes out prior to next year's session that will deal with more questions about the revenues needed to actually support all of our transportation needs in the state. This first bill talks about a surcharge on EVs that would be placed essentially as a surcharge onto their registration. Since they don't pay gas taxes, this is a mechanism for allowing everyone to participate in all the costs that are associated with providing transportation in our state. Let me say something also, in both of these bills, since they were introduced, been a number of things that we're going to be looking at as changes. And this one in particular dedicates the resources in a certain way in which I don't think we really intend to do, and we're going to end up putting it directly to the Transportation Trust Fund. But the bottom line is, again, for these bills and a couple others that have come up, including Senator Quarterman's, who we just heard earlier, we'll be talking about transportation. I'm going to put together a work group. We're going to work through these bills over the coming weeks before we get out of session, and hopefully we're going to have really outstanding product. So that's the nature of this one, and I will see if my panel members have anything to add.
Sure. Yeah. All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair and committee members. My name is Brian Patrica. I'm here today as a civil engineer and a director on the board of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Maryland. And Mr. Chair, I'm also a Hammond High School grad and one of your constituents. Our organization represents over 90 local engineering companies with more than 7,500 employees here in Maryland. ACC Maryland supports Senate Bill 1065. As advocates for sustainable infrastructure development and responsible transportation funding, we believe this measure is crucial to the long-term vitality of our transportation system and environmental sustainability. With the projected shortfall in transportation funding over the coming years, it's imperative that we develop additional funding sources to ensure the safety and reliability of our transportation. This bill helps provide a necessary influx of funding to the Transportation Trust Fund, allowing for essential maintenance and development projects to proceed without undue financial strain. On a maybe a more personal note, this past weekend, I was driving my daughter. She's in 8th grade to a basketball tournament. We hit traffic. She's nervous. We're going to run late. We pull into the express toll lanes. She says, "Oh, how does this work? Where does this money go?" She did not realize the can of worms she was opening. After I explained to her the different funding sources and how things work, really her only question from my 8th grader was, "Well, what about the cars that don't use gas and drive on the road?" So I share that quick story just to kind of demonstrate the behaviors, the expectations of residents are changing. So we need to be proactive, like Mr. Chair was explaining, to maintain the level of service and safety with our infrastructure that we expect. And this bill is progress towards that goal. So on behalf of ACC Maryland, we ask for a favorable report on Senate Bill 1065.
Mr. Chair. You know, you had me at Hammond.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Frank Principe here on behalf of the Train Commission. Just wanted to thank the chair for the opportunity to bring these important recommendations forward. Certainly understand that there is work to be done. I appreciate the time that the committee spent early in January to talk about the recommendations. So these are fully consistent with that and fully supportive, and look forward to the work ahead. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And my children don't ask me about transportation stuff because they don't want to hear the stories. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Questions for the witnesses? Thank you very much. I think that concludes the testimony on that bill. And we'll just keep going and finish up because I've already kind of teed up the next bill. So yes, Mr. Principe can stay around. This is Maryland Transportation Authority tolls collection and use. This is about finding some more revenue from tolling that occurs from individuals from primarily outside the state who would come through, and we're looking at doing a slightly higher rate to bring in more revenues, obviously, and to pay for what we need to pay for. This bill is complicated, and I'll just say that from the start. And it's one of the reasons we're going to have this work group. And the technicalities of dealing with it are complicated. But I still think it's very well worth our time and effort to look at it. In both cases, this bill and the other bill prior, had conversations with the Secretary of Transportation. We're working through a lot of the details. I suspect there will be a series of amendments. But as I said, I believe conceptually, this is something we should be looking at. Other states have done it. And for those reasons, we're going to put this together, this work group, and hopefully work through these issues. Mr. Principe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you've said where we are currently with this conversation, and clearly this only begins to sort of, scratch the surface of what the needs are that are out there. But as a recommendation, coming from the commission, was very heavily supported by the commissioners to bring forward for the General Assembly's consideration. So I appreciate, the opportunity to continue to work on this along with other, topics as we're trying to really, put in place the resources that are needed to fund these important and critical projects for the state of Maryland. So thank you again, sir, and happy to answer any questions if folks have any.
Questions for Mr. Principe. I also have Mike Sakata. Mike, good timing. Also favorable on this.
I'll start. Sorry about that. Good morning, Chair. I stand before you, representative of Maryland Transportation Builders and Materials Association. We've got about 200 members, business firms, and represent about 40,000 employees. We're the voice for the transportation community. with robust membership, we like Senate Bill 1093. At the end of the day, this is transformative. It's outside the box thinking, as previous commissioner, chair. To me, these are those outside the box thinking that we look for transformative thinking. I think ultimately, couple things we want to make sure, and it's on our written testimony, the shall, the may, we want to make sure that those still allow for the agency to operate and have existing partnerships that they currently have. But other than that, we are fully supportive of this bill. And I think this is a step in the right direction for all these. So thank you for bringing it forward. And we consider a favorable report on Senate Bill 1093. This bill is a critical step forward in the collective mission to enhance Maryland's transportation infrastructure, ensuring it meets the needs of our citizens today and in the future.
Thank you. Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I have one listed as unfavorable. Louis Campion.
It's never fun when you're opposing the chairman's bill, particularly a chairman who has worked so well with you over a number of years and do have a lot of members in his district. So again, Louis Campion with Maryland Motor Truck Association. And we are here in respectful opposition in the bill's current format, and appreciate the effort to increase transportation revenue. Just as a backdrop, because we heard a lot during the train commission about the tolls that were reduced back in 2015. Truck tolls were actually not reduced. They were reduced only at the Bay Bridge to come into synchronization with the JFK highway to avoid diversion. We've actually had tolls increase 5 times since 2001, and it's inevitable that the passage of this bill will also continue to increase our costs and tolls. The fiscal note actually concludes saying some small businesses, such as independent truck drivers and owners that deliver cargo to the Port of Baltimore, frequently use MDTA's toll facilities in daily operations, and that is absolutely true. We are not opposed to tolling as a funding mechanism for new capacity, either new roads, new lanes, as long as we have the option to use them, because that's a user fee, right? That's what we're paying for. But as this bill is drafted now, that's not really what happens. It drives up costs on the users of the existing toll roads to pay for projects elsewhere. And that raises a concern, certainly for us. We heard in some of the train commission meetings about the need for a toll increase already that will be coming in the next few years. And so we're really concerned that this bill will further increase those tolls beyond that existing need, simply because the authority now will be responsible for paying for projects that historically have not come under its jurisdiction. So we just ask for some caution as you consider. I heard the chairman's comments about work groups and the like, and appreciate that. We just ask for some caution and consideration as you move forward. Certainly happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony, but know for sure that the past few years that the state has worked with the trucking industry coming from the port to Trade Point and reduced their axle pay by axle. So they gave them a decrease
for that one specific turnaround.
For that one area. So
yes.
They did do that. That's something that we've been working on for years now as a committee. And we continue to work on that because, as you know, in my district, it really affects not just the Port of Baltimore, but Trade Point Atlantic and other places. And my concern is your concern just as well with the independent drivers. We want to make sure that they make a good, decent cost of living, but our truck drivers at the same time, the repeated cost of them. So we have worked with them, but I think we can continue to work with them. And I think, Mr. Chair, you've had work with them, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator.
Any other questions? So I don't know if you've ever been in part of any around with any of our work groups before, but we bring all parties to the table.
And I appreciate that and would look forward to that. So thank you.
You bet. All right. Thank you. That concludes the hearing on that bill. And now we're on 1094, Senator McKay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'd like to present Senate Bill 1094, State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund Alteration and Extension. You may notice that the co-sponsors of this bill have a single thread of commonality. Each of those senators in their districts actually have one of Maryland's man-made lakes. Just to note that we in Maryland don't have any natural lakes, they're all man-made. And so a lot of times the State Lakes Protection Restoration Fund, we do spend a lot of money in Garrett County up at Deep Creek Lake, but in Allegheny County, Lake Habib, places like Unicorn Lake, Copper Lake, Blair's Valley Lake, St. Mary's Lake, lots of lakes that this funding goes to. Now, the purposes of this bill is to extend the termination date of the State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund. The bill also increases and mandated appropriation funds from fiscal 2026 and fiscal year 2027 to $2 million. What do we do with this money? You have heard Senate Bill 837 about a week ago when we were discussing in Deep Creek Lake a vegetation study. We actually took one of the coves and we did a dredging project with this funding, and it's able to make sure that the lake is enjoyed by all stakeholders. This is something that Senator Edwards, year after year after year, really hit home. I have done the best I can to fill his shoes, but I think he wore a size 12, so there was no way I was going to be able to fill his shoes. But would help fill his shoes if you would actually pass this bill and find the money for that. I do believe in your Zoom land, I have Delegate Wendell Beitzel who would like to testify on this, if it's okay, sir.
There he is. How are you, Wendell?
Hi, Chairman Gazone. How are you?
Great.
Glad to be with you here.
Good to have you.
Mhm. Am I up?
Oh, you're up.
Okay, good. So Chairman Gazone and members of the Budget and Taxation Committee, good afternoon. And as most of you know, I spent 16 years in the House of Delegates here in Annapolis. I'm here today to testify favorably on Senate Bill 1994, State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund. I want to thank Senators McKay, Quarterman, Ellis, King, Folden, and Bailey for introducing the bill, and Delegate Heinball for the companion bill over House Bill 1347. Senator Edwards and I introduced and championed this bill initially several years ago. Actually, it was probably about 7 years ago now, and it passed but had a sunset date. Subsequent bills were introduced to provide funding for this purpose, but previous bills that passed always had sunset dates. The bill simply extends the sunset date, as Senator McKay pointed out, for 2 years until June 30, 2027, which will provide with up to 9 years of continuing funding for the state lakes in Maryland, and increases the amount currently authorized from $1 million to $2 million. The state owns 16 freshwater lakes that are really in need of funding to improve water quality, remove sediments, and improve recreational quality. I'm here today to urge you to give this legislation favorable consideration. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Questions for the senator or former delegate? Thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it's time for the BRFA. I can sense the excitement in the air. All right, we don't have any, oh, there we go. Secretary Grady, great to see you.
You too. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Looks like Mr. Vice Chair has stepped out, but members of the committee, thank you for the, my name is Helene Grady, Secretary of Budget and Management, and I'm here with Mark Nicole, Deputy Secretary. Thank you for the opportunity to present the administration's Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, which implements several actions to balance the fiscal 2025 budget and to provide out-year structural budget relief. These budget actions provide approximately $1.8 billion in general fund savings through fiscal year 2029, including $1 billion in savings between 24 and 25. First, I want to share some context for this BRFA. I know we do not have consensus on all of the approaches the administration took with this budget, but I hope our testimony today will help folks understand why we proposed the measures that we did. The governor's 25 budget proposal continues the administration's commitment to fiscal discipline, addressing some of the state's critical and immediate needs while providing out-year structural budget relief. The governor and administration have been clear-eyed about the structural deficit and have acknowledged the problem since prior to assuming office. This transitional budget reflects progress on key objectives and allows us time to work in partnership with the legislature to address our longer-term structural challenges. The governor's proposed budget meets the Spending Affordability Committee's recommendations to balance the budget on a cash basis with a minimum $100 million fund balance, reduce the fiscal 25 structural deficit by at least 33%, and maintain a rainy day fund balance of at least 8.5% of general fund revenues. The proposed budget accomplishes these objectives while also making critical and in some cases historic investments in top priorities for Marylanders. These include public safety, education, childcare, housing, economic development, and workforce development, as well as critical investments in our state workforce that will help our agencies better serve Marylanders. We agree with many of the important and laudable programs that were previously established, and you see many of these reflected in the proposed budget, including historic funding under the blueprint for pre-K through 12 education, an increase of $461 million in the proposed budget, and record funding for the Child Care Scholarship Program, an additional $270 million annually and nearly $490 million over 2 years. In order to meet our fiscal responsibility objectives while also prioritizing these critical investment areas, the administration had to make some difficult trade-offs and worked to refocus state government toward funding what we see as the state's most core responsibilities, evaluating how and what the state is spending its money on before considering asking taxpayers to contribute more. This requires reining in some spending that in our view grew unsustainably during the pandemic years in order to redirect resources across the state's most core responsibilities and some of our highest priorities. The approach taken by the administration reflected in the BRFA includes providing relief from various funding mandates, both one-time and ongoing, increasing revenues to the general fund in both the short and long term, expanding allowable uses of certain funds and revenues, as well as authorizing fund transfers, and making other changes to current law to provide budget relief in the short and or long term to both the general fund and the Transportation Trust Fund. As DLS's forecast indicates, this work is only going to get harder in the years to come. The measures included in the BRFA, in our view, represent a strong starting point for the hard work ahead. For sake of time, I don't intend to speak to every measure. There are more than 30 of them in the BRFA, but plan to speak to the most significant measures, although we're happy, of course, to answer questions on any of them. The first category of BRFA measures include mandate relief, of which there are 13 provisions. The BRFA allows the administration to propose meaningful mandate relief in both the short and long term to address the state's structural budget challenge. The most significant of the mandate relief provisions include a provision that rebases funding for the CADE formula for community colleges in fiscal 2025 and the out years. Under current law, funding for the local community colleges has grown by 57% since just fiscal year 2021. The BRFA provision still allows for more than 50% growth in funding over the last 4 years, an increase of $125 million versus the $250 million in funding just 4 years ago. Per FTE spending, FTE meaning full-time equivalent student, spending grows by 86% from fiscal 21 to fiscal 25, even under the BRFA provision. Second provision that's particularly significant proposes to rebase funding for the Selinger formula for non-public higher education institutions by tying the formula to undergraduate enrollment only rather than total enrollment. Under current law, funding for private colleges and universities has grown by 132% since fiscal year 2021. After the BRFA provision, funding for the program will grow by 19% over the last 4 years. Moving to revenue adjustments, the BRFA includes 4 provisions, the 3 most significant being a provision to reduce the downward adjustment to general fund revenues from revenue volatility to $100 million in fiscal 25 and 26, a measure to increase interest revenue to the general fund for 25 through 28 by limiting the number of special funds allowed to earn interest on their fund balances. And third, a measure that reduces the commissions paid to lottery agents from 6% to 5.5% on sales and from 3% to 2% on cashing. Under current law, lottery commissions have grown by 56 million or 34% since fiscal 20. After the BRFA provision, lottery agent commissions will grow by closer to 15% over the last 5 years. The proposed adjustments also bring Maryland's commission rates more in line with neighboring states. The BRFA also expands the allowable use on 3 special funds, and in addition, authorizes 6 transfers to the general fund, the largest of which include $149 million in the dedicated purpose account reserved for cybersecurity, $44 million in the dedicated purpose account reserved for capital projects that are no longer needed, and $40 million in excess funds in the reserve account established by the state to pay unemployment compensation for state employees. The BRFA also includes 2 cost avoidance measures. The first authorizes the MSDE to implement a freeze in the Child Care Scholarship Program enrollment, if needed, to ensure that the program is able to live within its newly expanded funding levels in fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. The second allows MDH to establish a limit on the dollar amount of individual directed and family directed goods and services provided to a recipient. Next, the BRFA includes several provisions needed to align program spending with available funding in support of the January 2024 Consolidated Transportation Program. Last, one notable other provision in the BRFA reflects the authorization to transfer $90 million from the Strategic Energy Investment Fund to the dedicated purpose account. The funding will be used to support the implementation of the Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022 and Maryland's Climate Pollution Reduction Plan. A majority of the funding must support programs helping low and moderate income families or overburdened or underserved communities. With that summary, I was going to ask Mark Nicole to talk through several proposed amendments that we'd like to bring for consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Mark Nicole, Deputy Secretary, Maryland Department of Budget and Management. As the Secretary said, the administration has 9 amendments that we would like to offer to the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act of 2024. These amendments make clarifications and modifications to the first reading file bill in support of the governor's budget plan. Amendment number 1 would expand the allowable uses of the Senior Prescription Drug Assistance Program. Amendment number 2 clarifies the intent of a provision around tree plantings that would say that the Chesapeake and Atlantic coastal bays can support those costs in fiscal year 24 as well as 25 through 31, as was introduced in the original bill. Amendment number 3 expands the allowable uses of the Maryland Police and Correctional Training Commission Fund. Amendment number 4 adjusts the revenue adjustment under the revenue volatility legislation that the secretary previously mentioned to 0 in both fiscal years 24 and 25. Amendment number 5 reduces the requirement for a supplemental pension contribution from $75 million to $50 million going forward. Amendment number 6 increases the amount of the transfer in the state's self-insurance trust fund for state employees from $40 million to $60 million. Amendment number 7 transfers $10 million from the school construction revolving loan fund and the rate stabilization fund to the general fund. Amendment number 8 adjusts the miscellaneous operating expenses that were recommended to be transferred in the original legislation from $355,000 to $151,000. And amendment number 9 makes a technical clarification to a provision in the 2024 operating budget for a PAYGO grant to expand the allowable uses outside of PAYGO. Additionally, we are going to propose, we will be submitting to the committee one amendment for the capital budget. It will deauthorize previously authorized general obligation bonds dating back all the way to fiscal year 2003 through 2016. And those deauthorizations will total $9.1 million.
Thanks, Mark. The Department of Budget and Management believes that the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act of 2024 as amended is necessary to ensure a balanced fiscal 2025 budget and to provide out-year structural budget relief. For these reasons, we urge the committee to vote favorable with amendments on SB 362. We're happy to answer questions about any of the provisions. I would note we also have a representative from Maryland Department of Health here and MDOT to help with questions if there are any on those provisions.
Very good. Questions for Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation, Madam Secretary. Couple of questions. One, you mentioned as Mark mentioned as he was going through the amendments, the provision to use funds from the Police and Correction Training Commission. So are we talking about the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, or are we talking about Police and Training Commission dollars? Can you just elaborate on the dollars you're talking about?
Do you want to ask again or?
Sure. So you mentioned the use, the BRFA will allow you all to use, or the amendment will allow you to use funds from the police and training commissions. So are we talking about the Maryland Police?
Training and Standards Commission.
Okay, so that's not corrections, that's the police. Training and standards. What was mentioned is police and corrections.
Police and Correctional Training
Commissions.
So are we talking about the $2 million that's assigned to the police, the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission?
So
there's there are different fundings that go there.
So it is the fund that ties to the $2 million. It has come to our attention that the fund currently has a balance of approximately $10 million. And the proposal here would be to expand the allowable uses, and there would be a supplemental budget provision that will come before the committee with the next supplemental budget to allow $2 million in fiscal year 24 to support current activities and save the general fund $2 million.
Okay. Mr. Chair, if I might. In recent hearings and through the JCR reports, there was an explanation, and I'm just trying to get an explanation on the funding that the $9+ million were going to be used for some IT enhancements, and so that would still be a part of their plan going forward, correct?
Correct.
That's our understanding.
We spoke to the agency, and those plans can still go forward.
All right, cool. Mr. Chairman, sorry. Second, I would really like on page 3, the change use of special funds. I had a conversation with you all not too long ago regarding a specific special fund change where the dollars were taken from the a piece legislation that was put through this committee. We formed a cancer research fund, which is under special funds. And the part of what's going on with the budget is those funds were now, that's pediatric cancer fund, by the way, research. And those dollars were going to be used now in general fund. They were taken out. I don't see those listed here. They were, you mentioned the top 3 or 4. So, and I guess.
Page 6.
Okay, we listed the pediatric cancer research provision on page 6 of our testimony.
Okay.
We didn't speak to it in my oral testimony, but it's listed here under the category in the middle of the page. In addition, the bill authorizes the following transfers to the general fund. And the last on that list is $5 million from the Maryland Pediatric Cancer Fund.
Okay. So what's the intent of that $5 million, which is the startup dollars for that pediatric cancer fund?
Right.
And we have legislation this year. I believe you're aware that legislation this year narrows the scope of that bill to ensure that the funds can be used as efficiently as possible versus, an unintended consequence of the research not being able to be sustainable.
So I can share the rationale that the administration based our recommendation on. And as I said at the beginning, I understand there may not be consensus on all the measures we've proposed, but happy to at least help you understand why we landed where we did on this one. Our rationale had to do with the fact that given the need to close the significant cash deficit that we were facing for fiscal 25 and make progress on the structural deficit, our charge was to work with our agencies to review how state resources were being allocated and identify opportunities where we thought resources funding could be redirected toward the most core responsibilities and to help us meet the balancing targets that we have. This was an item that was identified and we decided to include in the proposal for a couple of reasons. Primarily, one reason being that the program had not yet gotten off the ground. Secondly, when we look at the budget for the Maryland Department of Health, which, as you know, is significant, and we think about the core responsibilities for state general funds, we came to the conclusion and based our proposal on the fact that when it comes to state general funds, we don't see necessarily the administration biomedical research as among the most core responsibilities for those state general fund dollars. We support and are incredibly proud of the research institutions in our state who draw down hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding from NIH and other agencies to pursue the biomedical research that they do and that they do amazing things using those federal funds. When it comes to state funds, one area where there is a primary focus on medical research is within the cigarette restitution funds, as you know. And so much of that fund does go to fund cancer research. When we look at general funds, we just did not see as big a priority compared to some of the other challenges that we're looking to fund. And given the budget balancing targets that we have, this was one that we felt compelled to propose up to reduce.
I appreciate your explanation. I'll say this and then I'll and the reason we put forth that piece of legislation is because it came to our attention that those research functions or research entities that we have within the state did not research for pediatric cancer research funds research. And so that's why we put that legislation forward. And we'll figure a way to work through it. But I just wanted to make you understand that the existing research for cancer in this state do not include research for pediatric cancer. And that's why we brought the legislation forward. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Madam Secretary, Deputy Secretary, good to see you. You had mentioned, I think it was $9.3 million of deauthorization for capital projects. You said 2003, 2016, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
9.1.
9.1 mil. When, I haven't seen the list. Can you get me a copy and get the subcommittee a copy?
We can absolutely share that with the committee.
Okay, I'd love to see the project. Second is, I saw that there's other provisions of the Budget Reconciliation Financing Act. It removes provision on DDA setting a dollar cap for self-directed and family services. What was the thought process behind that? It's on page 2, from my document, it's page 2, other provisions.
And we have Erin McMullen from the Maryland Department of Health is here. Is it okay if we ask her to join us at the table to help explain that provision?
Good afternoon. For the record, Erin McMullen, Chief of Staff at the Maryland Department of Health. So our rationale for that particular BRFA provision centers around a few things. Our DDA system, I think, as you know, has traditional services and self-directed services. No matter which path you choose, there's 52 different services available to you. However, if you're in self-direction, there's one more option, which is individual goods and services. The SDS Act in 2022 removed a cap on spending for individual goods and services. The removal of that ceiling, which was around $5,000, essentially created an unfunded mandate in DDA's budget. Right now, this is the first fiscal year where we can see people have the ability to move funds around as part of their self-direct. So the removal of that cap essentially left an unfunded mandate in DDA's budget.
And then just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman, just very quick, because I know we have 30 witnesses behind. And this might not be the intent, but interpretation could be that it would lower the amount that they were getting reimbursed. Is that right?
The intention behind it is not to lower the amount. People still have their budget. Everyone at DDA gets an individualized budget, traditional or self-direction. It's not meant to limit any sort of pay to direct care providers.
Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate their time. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the information. I'm just looking through this and see all the different parts of where you taken out and inserted, but one of my concerns, I guess I'm looking at, is the State Board of Occupational Therapy Practices. It looks like you took about 0.8 million. From what I can see, the funds come directly from the licensure fees and not from the state funds. So how did you get to that point of that type of much funds coming out of there?
Mark can address it.
Thank you for your question, Senator. So when we were going through all the budgets of the health regulatory boards, we did a review of each board's outstanding fund balance at the end of fiscal year 23 and how that fund balance changed over the next 2 years. And we looked at those boards that had fund balances in excess of 100% of annual spending over that period of time, and made a recommendation to reduce those balances and reauthorize the uses to be able to support behavioral health expenses in the Maryland Department of Health.
I see just this year had this, I think it's the first taking that out. And there's a couple others that I see, counselors and others, but I don't know how detrimental this would be to their practice and what they're doing. I'm looking possibly that if this is a one-time thing, And I'm hoping that it couldn't happen again, maybe put them in a parallel state. Can we make sure that by doing something like this to those that just get fees and not from the state of Maryland, they're not getting these funds, that we can make sure that maybe we can assess it and make sure that it doesn't put them in a perilous state? That's all.
Certainly, Senator, and this is proposed as a one-time action.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I apologize for being out of the room for the analyst presentation and most of your presentation. The one issue that I wanted to ask about is the full-time equivalent student data issue that was addressed in the well, it's addressed in the analyst report, and it relates to the projections for enrollment. And I don't understand the issue, but the way the numbers work and what the analyst had is compared to current law, I guess it's their recommendation, it'd be 0 general fund expense this year, and then it jumps up to 30 million and grows from there. So could someone summarize what the issue is?
Should we let DLS do that? This is
You're talking about the DLS document, Senator?
Yes, that's what I'm referring to.
DLS is going to be coming up right behind us.
Should we let them?
Okay,
respond?
whatever you'd like. I mean, is this an issue you guys are on top of or know much about? If you don't, that's
Yes.
okay.
I think you're referring to the methodology issue. Is that your
Yeah.
understanding? Okay. So yes, DBM used a different methodology this year than in recent years to calculate the formulas for Cade and Selinger. And the extent of the change, as I understand it, is that in previous years, we had used self-reported enrollment data from the public four-year institutions to calculate the 4-year per FTE student amount, which would then goes into the formula for Cade and Selinger. This year, we used MHEC data instead of the self-reported data coming up from the 4-year institutions. And I think DBM's read of the statute was that we could do either. I think some in DBM actually thought the statute leaned a little more toward using the MHEC data. Regardless, it was a change. We probably didn't socialize that change as much as we should have or could have. And DLS flagged it as a change. We agree with DLS that going forward, it would be helpful to specify in the statute which methodology we should all use.
Okay, I understand the legal issue now, but in terms of the math issue, my impression is your view is that the MHEC projections are more reliable than the individual institution projections?
I don't think I can opine on that, to be honest. I understand actually, after getting caught up to speed on this issue, that I'm not sure either projection is entirely reliable. What I understand is the MHEC projections have a tendency to be overstated, which then I think understates the per pupil.
That's what's confusing, is that MHEC has been overestimating compared to individual institutions.
That is my understanding, even from conversations with Dr. Rai. Yeah.
And the reason you all went to that this year was why?
The reason, interesting enough, well, partly because we have a lot of new talent on the team. So fresh eyes taking a look at things. And we're doing some digging into the data that had been used in recent years around the self-reported data from the public 4 years, and found that the public 4 years were using different methodologies themselves to calculate FTE, and therefore felt that that was not the best data to be using because we were relying on different calculations of FTE.
Gotcha.
So I think that had some good sense to it as well.
I gotcha.
But we probably could have gone a few more steps beyond that to then also examine the MHEC data.
No.
Probably have some conversations with DLS and align on what
Okay,
we want
that's
to
helpful.
do.
I look forward to hearing what that was incredibly helpful. I'll just say, as a former member of the Finance Committee, the University System Maryland Board of Regents, all the estimates are always wrong, and they're very, very hard to do.
These are all forecast assumptions.
No,
as
they
far
are.
as
They're
I
all
know.
forecasts of
Because
human
another
behavior.
question I raised was, should we be using actuals from prior year?
Well, that's kind of where I'm going with this. Is I'd suggest that as we go forward, we think about something that is more likely to be accurate. So, but to be continued. Thank you.
Sure.
Are there other questions? Going once, going twice? Yes, there you go, Senator.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation today.
Sure.
I had a question in regards to kind of piggyback on a little bit of that, the CADE formula and
Yes.
our community colleges. And just want to know if you could explain some of the rationale, and if I'm mistaken on this, but please all means explain it to me. But historically, or at least in the most recent years, that the community colleges were getting about 29 cents on the dollar to what the system was getting. And my understanding is that the community colleges have taken a cut, but the system has not. And so I just didn't know what the thought process was as far as the equity between all of our institutions and what that thought process was, making those determinations.
Okay, I will jump in, and I'm going to welcome Mark to add to what I say, because I may miss some important points. But my understanding is that only in very recent years, the community colleges have been funded at the full level of the formula, which is the 29% of the public 4-year. And that's been very recent. A couple of things I would say is, first of all, that I think the administration was incredibly eager to provide historic funding in the current fiscal 24 budget for the community colleges at $393 million. Given the change in our structural outlook, this was one of those areas that we took a look at the sustainability of that considerable increase over just these last couple of years, as the funding formula has been fully funded. And this was one area where we felt that a modest reduction, still second highest level in history at $375 million, was reasonable. I would say that the assertion that there are no cuts within the USM system budget is not entirely true. System budget obviously is really significant and complex. And there are a lot of puts and takes throughout the system budget. The system is absorbing a significantly higher turnover rate in their fiscal 25 budget based on our analysis. And that is the primary area of reduction facing the system compared to what their baseline budget would be next year. Trying to remember offhand, but I think that had a value of at least $50 million in, you could say, reduction versus fiscal 24 in the system budget. It's difficult always to see the bottom line in the system because there are so many puts and takes. So for example, we were really proud to be able to include, for instance, a close to $5 million increase to the University of Maryland Eastern Shore to double the state match to the federal land grant. That comes across in the bottom line across the whole system, but it's a put and take against some of the reductions system-wide on the personnel budget. That makes sense.
No, I appreciate the explanation. And I think we are hopeful. We want all of our institutions to be kind of, treated in the same manner, I guess. And understanding the give and the take and some of the challenges between, it's not, it's apples and oranges to a certain extent. I get that, but just trying to keep a level playing field between not just the higher institutions, the 4-year institutions, but also the community colleges as well. So,
yeah, and I would just add, it's just not as transparent what's happening in the system budget because it's not a formula mandate the way CADE is.
Okay.
It's like I said, it's a large, as you know, large complex budget made up of multiple institutions, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Secretary, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna bring up, I think we have a short presentation from Department of Legislative Services on their analysis of this. And then we'll get into testimony.
Thank you, Tanya Zimmerman, the operating budget manager for DLS. And with me today is Carrie Cook. So we have 2 documents for you, the regular fiscal and policy note that has write-ups on all of the individual provisions. There's also a second document that summarizes our recommendations on the BRFA. We're not going to go over all of the provisions in the BRFA because you've already heard those, but we're just going to go through our recommendations. If you turn to page 1 of our document, this kind of shows all of the provisions, the fiscal impact of the various provisions, but the column on the far right-hand side are the DLS recommendations. Most of these on this page are related to kind of actions in the budget itself. There are a couple of recommendations on the BRFA, which Carrie will go over. But on those, there's a handful of them that relate to just reducing the funds directly in the budget instead of contingently on the BRFA. The largest of those is the rainy day fund and also the sweeper provisions and the school construction revolving loan fund and the business facade improvement program. There's two in the Maryland Department of Health related to a transfer from the Health Information Exchange for in the Medical Care Programs Administration for IT. The first is on the general fund appropriation, modifying the language as a technical correction based on the language actually in the BRFA. And the second is on the federal fund appropriation. This is a special fund transfer. So the contingency on the federal fund was in error, and we're recommending striking that. Then I'll turn it over to Carrie, who will go over the recommendations on the BRFA itself.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Beginning on page 3 describes the 3 DLS alternative recommendations to provisions in the BRFA as introduced. There are 2 items on mandate relief. They both have to do with MDOT. First item is state of good repair for the Maryland Transit Administration. So the BRFA as introduced reduced the amount of funding for this purpose in MTA for fiscal 2025 only from 450 million to 439 million. And DLS has recommended striking this provision as additional funding was made available in supplemental budget number 1. And it also removed the language that would have reduced the funding contingent on this provision. In terms of highway user revenues, the BRFA as introduced advances the reduction in the local rate for HUR distribution that would have occurred in fiscal 2028. It advances that rate to fiscal 2026, which is a 15.6% rate in fiscal 2026 and 27 compared to a 20% under current law. DLS has recommended further reducing the local rate for HUR distribution to 9.6%, making a flat rate beginning in fiscal 2025. There's also a DLS alternative item on changing the use of special funds, and this has to do with the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. In the BRFA as introduced, it authorizes a transfer of 90 million from certain balances within SEIF to the dedicated purpose account. And DLS has recommended restricting transfers out of this account and directing more of this transfer to the administrative account within SEIF. So we're recommending changing some of the balances where this funding is coming from. And there's additional details on the provision as introduced and the alternative on page 12 and 13. Moving on to the new DLS recommendations to the BRFA, which is on page 5. First item has to do with retirement system funding. So this would reduce the amount of additional retirement contribution that is above the actuarially required level from 75 million to 50 million each year, beginning in fiscal 2025. And it also alters the calculation beginning in fiscal 2026. There are also several items related to transfers to the general fund. Several are from the dedicated purpose account. First item authorizes a transfer of 25 million from the dedicated purpose account to the general fund in fiscal 2025. And these funds were provided in fiscal 2023 to DNR for critical maintenance needs. A second item is a transfer of 7.6 million for various purposes in the Department of Health that were authorized in fiscal 2023 that were unused. The third item is a transfer of 4.5 million from the dedicated purpose account to the general fund for the learning and extended academic programs in MSDE, which was also unused. And the final general fund item is Baltimore City Community College Bard Building. This is withdrawing 2 million in appropriated funds in fiscal 2022 for a demolition project to adhere more closely to the amount for the contract award that was approved. We also have a few items in terms of using funds for other purposes. In the Department of Health, there is a proposed provision regarding the Senior Prescription Drug Assistance Program balance. So it's using that unused special fund balance to instead use it for behavioral health services within MDH. There's also an item regarding program open space land acquisition funding, allowing a transfer of 6.7 million to instead be used for personnel costs in the Maryland Park Service and the Maryland Forest Service. Moving on to page 6, 2 miscellaneous items. The first regarding calculation of higher education formulas. This clarifies that the full-time student equivalent count for four-year institutions and the calculation of the various formulas use self-reported numbers that is calculated on a credit hour basis that is reported from the institutions. And finally, the local income tax reserve repayment item specifies that 10 million in the annual distribution to the local income tax reserve account from fiscal 2026 through 2060 is to be used to repay 350 million transferred from the account to the Education Trust Fund, and it ends that distribution after fiscal 2060. There is more information on each of these recommendations beginning on page 9, but that concludes our formal presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Questions for our analysts? Senator?
Thank you. As you heard me before ask about the FTE issue. I'm much more clear about it than I was before I asked the secretary, but I'm still a little confused, particularly in your analysis. It shows a general fund expenditure of 0 in FY25, and then it goes to $30 million. So there's some fiscal impact of the change that I'm not understanding.
So the impact is 0 in 2025 because the provision would start in fiscal 2026 because the calculation was already made for fiscal 2025. So this would start it next year, and it would be more consistent with how it was calculated in the past, as the secretary had mentioned, but would clarify it in statute.
Do you all have an opinion, though, on which method is more accurate?
So as the secretary noted, the MHEC projections can be a little high, which understate the per FTES funding from the for the selected public 4 years, which has the effect of lowering the formula costs for in the formulas this year. So it's the kind of change between the two that impacted that this year. So this would have been consistent with how it was calculated in the past.
No, I mean, I get that part. I got this, how it's calculated in the past, but $30 million is not nothing. And so getting it right seems to be pretty important. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Oh, yes, Senator.
Thank you. On page number 5 at the bottom, it talks about the senior prescription drug assistance program. Can you comment a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so this is usually funded, usually funds a program in Medicaid. So it's using the balance in for behavioral health services. This was an authorized use in fiscal 2018, and the funds are actually already in the budget to do this in fiscal 2025. It's just that there was an authorization actually for that purpose. So it actually is intended just to authorize the use of the funds that are already in the budget. But this is a program that kind of already exists within Medicaid.
You may not be the people that I want to ask the question. I'm just curious as to why there's any interference in that prescription drug program.
And you might want to. Sorry, Ann Wagner is the analyst for Medicaid, and she'll have some additional information for you.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So under that program, there has been a balance growing to about $11.1 million. They've been seeing some lower enrollment recently. And so that's why that provision would transfer $5 million for use in behavioral health. Does that help answer?
I just want to know why are we interfering with that drug? Why is it being eliminated? Is it being eliminated?
No, this is just using a portion of the balance that has accumulated, and it is supporting behavioral health services. So the program's not be eliminated. There would still be a balance after it, and the program is funded in Medicaid in fiscal 2025.
If you had been here yesterday, you would understand that really is a problem for us, for me personally.
So this is different than the state employee prescription drugs. This is for the Medicaid. Ann can probably speak more directly to the eligible population.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you all very much. All right. Denise Riley. I'm gonna call a couple names usually ahead of time, so you'll be on deck, whoever's, you're up.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm actually in opposition. Was this just in favor?
It says favorable.
Okay, should I wait?
You're here now.
Okay.
Kevin McCauley is up next.
Okay.
And then Nora Leitner. Go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Denise Riley. I'm Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs for the American Federation of Teachers in Maryland. You do have my a written testimony, so I'll just summarize. AFT Maryland represents the faculty at Montgomery, Frederick, Howard, and Prince George's community colleges. We strongly oppose the provision in the BRFA that would permanently and drastically cut state aid to Maryland's community colleges. Most of the colleges are facing an increase in the number of students due to the Blueprint's dual enrollment program. These cuts would jeopardize essential programs at our two-year institutions when they're being asked to do more. If these cuts are enacted, the repercussions will be severe. It will undermine the progress that they have made and hinder their ability to fulfill the educational aspirations of the Blueprint and the students across Maryland. We urge the committee to reconsider the proposed cuts and prioritize the long-term success of our community colleges and the students they serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. McCauley? Yep. Yep, when you're, keep moving, everybody, when they come up. Yep. If I call you ahead of time, you'll be on deck, and as soon as the last person finishes, you can walk on up. I think I did. You can go ahead and begin your testimony.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Nora Leitner. My apologies for my difficult last name. I am the president of St. John's College here in Annapolis. And I urge you to reject the BRFA's current language. The reduction will really have a very negative impact on our college. Founded more than 300 years ago, St. John's is the third oldest college in the United States. And our partnership with the state of Maryland began in 1784 when we were chartered as St. John's College. The original governance mansion is still at the center of campus. It's McDowell Hall, one of the oldest academic buildings in the United States. I understand that you face difficult decisions during this 446th legislative session. But it's important to remember that our joint history and the length and strength of the partnership that St. John's College has with the state. You may know that our curriculum centered around the great books and our unique discussion-based pedagogy is really distinctive and singular. Our school and the independent college sector overall can offer unique educational opportunities to Maryland students because of the Salinger program. And all the funding that we award as financial aid from the Salinger program is dedicated to Maryland undergraduate students. So we are here to serve your constituencies. Our operating margins are extremely thin. That might be an understatement. So even a seemingly small reduction in the state budget is challenging for our budget. Coming out of COVID, we put tremendous extra resources into health and wellness efforts, providing perhaps the most comprehensive wellness program of any college in the United States of our size. This came at a cost, but is money well spent to ensure our students' academic success, their retention, graduation, and successful start in the workforce. And the Salinger reduction forces us either to reduce financial aid or to reduce these wellness offerings, potentially driving Maryland students to other out-of-state colleges. Recognizing the fiscal reality, MCWA has fashioned a solution in good faith that is fairer and more even-handed, allowing you to face the difficulties in the 25 budget. Thank you.
Questions?
Chairman, excuse me. Chairman, members of the Budget and Tax Committee. My name is Kurt McCauley. I represent service stations, convenience stores, auto repair shops in the state of Maryland. The lottery system, we strongly oppose this bill. It's the section in it, page 26, that would take away 0.5% of the lottery commission and 1/3 of the cashing commission. The lottery is $714 million back to the state last year in net profit after all paid. That was a 6% increase over FY22 of 40.6 million. That's possible because the lottery agent works so closely with its agents, gives them the merchandise and the tools to sell those lottery tickets, and the agents have the dedicated agents to sell lottery. It all works and it keeps working, but it's not going to keep working if we can't afford to put people on the machine all the time. It's $50,000 on average if you divide the 4,400 agents into what they pay. That's about $50,000. That won't cover the cost of keeping 2 employees on machine year round. Everything's up. Cost is up. Governor just put the labor bill in last year for minimum wage, and that's fine. We're paying most of our agents on the machine $18, $19, $20 an hour. Of course, the minimum wage caused wage compression, so everything's up, and they want to pull money out. It's not good. Truthfully, it's not good for any of these people here today. We have over 100 lottery agents outside there in the hallways that can't get into work, but we'd appreciate it. You need to pass a bill that would level playing field across everybody and just go ahead and get it over with. And thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for this witness? Thank you both. Ashish Parkay, Robin Elliott, Weymouth Spence, Michael Patty.
Hi.
Hey, Ashish.
Hi. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and all the committee members. Thank you for having me here and listening to my testimony. Today I'm here in favor of this bill with a minor amendment for the reduction in the lottery commission. I would like to thank Mr. Chair and all the committee members who helped us to get the bill passed last year to get some increment in the commission, which helps a small business retailers like us to meet both ends. When the little bit of commission goes up, it still helps us to pay the employee who are behind the lottery register, who takes care of the customers, and eventually it helps the generating the revenue for lottery and also the revenue for the state. So I would request that please consider of amending this bill by removing the reduction in lottery commission and help us small business owners, because lottery is one of the main stream of revenue for most of us. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Robin Elliott. I'm here today on behalf of the licensed clinical professional counselors of Maryland. As you heard, there are 3 boards under Department of Health where there are proposed fund balance transfers. One of them is for professional counselors for 1.6 million. The counselors just wanted to flag they're very concerned about this transfer. This, as you know, is licensure fees. It is coming from the people who are providing behavioral health services, who are very, very stretched right at the moment. And it is going to actually pay for those services under the behavioral health program. They really think this is more of a general fund function and that the cost should be borne by all, not just them. So they would ask for reversal of this proposed transfer. I also wanted to mention, I also represent occupational therapists, but there's a great team behind me, and they'll explain that issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Weymouth Spence, president of Washington Adventist University located in Tacoma Park, Maryland, beyond a four-year residential institution in Montgomery County. I'm the current chair of the McCure Board of Trustees, guiding both the association and my institution through some of the most challenging times in higher education. I strongly urge you to reject the current language in the BRFA. A reduction of this size will devastate many of my fellow McCure members. Let me share with you a little bit about Washington Adventist University. Since 1904, 120 years ago, we have been providing higher education to our local, national, and international communities. Our core values are rooted in compassion, service, and academic excellence. We have more than 50 collaborations and affiliations with other institutions within Maryland. We have also strongly embedded in our local Tacoma Park community. Often we are the single institution of choice for our students. As the DLS Higher Education Overview pointed out, Washington Adventist University is the top-ranked institution in the state of Maryland for economic mobility. The Economic Mobility Index accounts for the price of earnings minimum, which measures the average time it takes for students from families earning $30,000 or less to recoup their costs of obtaining a credit in combination with a proportion of students from low to moderate income households. 6 of the top 10 schools are the highest 3 tiers of the Economic Mobility Index are McCure institutions. We know how to help low-income students succeed, attain degrees, and climb the economic ladder. We know how to partner with the students for them to graduate on time with little or no debt, ready for the 21st century workplace. Only because Washington Adventist University focuses on undergraduate programs, we spared dramatic reductions. This simply isn't a reasonable way to implement reductions across these institutions. Please reject the language in the BRFA and work with McCure on the fair and reasonable proposals that are presented to the committee in good faith and the spirit of partnerships. Thank you very much.
Questions for this group? Thank you very much. Michael Patty, Sonia Lawson, Amy Miller, Holly Long, Kevin Canali,
Good afternoon, Chairman and the rest of the committee. My name is Sonia Lawson. I'm a licensed occupational therapist from District 13, representing the Maryland Occupational Therapy Association. We urgently request an amendment to Senate Bill 362. We understand that this legislation is necessary to balance the state's budget, but ask for the committee's consideration in reversing the proposed fund transfer of almost $800,000 from the Board of Occupational Therapy Practice to the general fund. And I appreciate Senator Sallings bringing up this point with the prior question. As a person that has paid license fees to the board for almost 40 years, I'm very concerned about the disproportionate amount being taken from the board's fund as compared to amounts proposed for the 2 other boards that were mentioned earlier. That our board will be left with only 68% of its annual fund budget balance, whereas the other 2 boards will be left with over 100% of theirs. So it's 68%. Our board has taken steps to efficiently manage the monies that providers pay in licensure fees, and now it seems that the board is being penalized for doing so. When the board is able to hire up to 4 staff to manage activities, our board has been able to do this with only 3. Because of the depletion of the board's funds, license fees will likely increase to recoup those lost monies. This adverse action will hit providers that are already stretched and in short supply. Additionally, the board is preparing to join the Occupational Therapy Licensure Compact, which will require an upgrade to technology, which comes at a cost. Depletion of funds would essentially be taking away opportunities that support interstate practice that could reduce workforce shortages in our own state. Lastly, it was mentioned that the funds were going to be used to support the Department of Behavioral Health. And in prior state policies, occupational therapy has been overlooked as mental health providers by this agency. So it's concerning that our money is going to be used to support that agency. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Miller, and I'm a constituent of District 14. I'm also here with the Maryland Occupational Therapy Association to support Senate Bill 362 with an amendment that excludes the Board of OT from having our funds moved. So I'm about to graduate with my doctorate in occupational therapy, so I'm currently budgeting to be able to pay my licensing fees to the Board of OT so that I can enter the workforce here in Maryland, which has a current shortage of occupational therapists. When paying these fees, it has been my understanding that they will go toward forwarding the profession of occupational therapy in the state of Maryland. So if you remember nothing else from my testimony, please remember these 4 things. Number 1, cutting occupational therapy will make healthcare costs go up in Maryland. OT is the only healthcare profession shown to actually reduce healthcare costs. So from a long-term financial standpoint, it is in the best interest of the people of Maryland to put more funding into OT and not less. Number 2, taking money that is only there due to our board being efficient and saving and planning ahead for upcoming costs only incentivizes waste, fraud, and abuse. So we are especially grateful that this committee is taking the time to review and adjust this bill to keep that from happening. Number 3, this is not taxpayer money. These funds come directly out of the pockets of occupational therapists in the form of our licensing fees. And taking this money now will put undue burden on future OTs like myself, who will now be required to pay higher licensing fees as a result. Number 4, at the end of the day, the proposed funds transferred from OT constitute a relatively small amount of the government's overall budget, but since we are such a small profession, they constitute a significant percentage of occupational therapy's budget. And again, it is also worth noting that OT's board is being disproportionately impacted compared to the other boards in this same bill. So psychologists will have 117% of their projected operating budget left over. Counselors and therapists will have 127%, but OT will only have 68% of our projected budget. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, Chair Gazone and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Holly Long, and I am a licensed occupational therapist and resident of District 6 here on behalf of the Maryland Occupational Therapy Association. I am here to express our desire for an amendment to Senate Bill 362, which proposes to transfer $776,000 from the Board of Occupational Therapy practice. It is our view that the reallocation of such a large portion of the board's funds would negatively impact our profession and would serve to disincentivize occupational therapists from pursuing and staying in the field at a time when they are critically needed. Not only can occupational therapists support the behavioral health workforce shortage with their educational training in mental health, but research has shown occupational therapy to be the only healthcare spending category where additional spending has a statistically significant association with lower admission rates for heart failure, pneumonia, and heart attack. With heart disease as the leading cause of death for Marylanders and the current state of critical healthcare workforce shortages in the state, it is increasingly important to incentivize occupational therapists to remain in the profession. The Board of Occupational Therapy Practice serves a vital role in the state's occupational therapy workforce, overseeing licensure to protect the citizens of Maryland. The board has functioned to efficiently process applications for licensure, provide temporary licensure, and support licensure supportability through the Interstate Occupational Therapy Licensure Compact, all of which support getting occupational therapists in the workforce quicker in the face of shortages. Losing funds will only serve to delay these processes and increase licensure fees for therapists who work so hard to keep Marylanders healthy. Reallocating therapist licensure fees to another agency is not in the best interest of the many Marylanders who would benefit from skilled services provided by an occupational therapist. Thank you all for your consideration of my testimony.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Kevin Canale here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support with amendments. 3 things. First, CAID. It's a great program. There's a reason why the program is so great. It's an equity issue. This BRFA cuts a lot of money from CAID. And I want everyone in here to understand you should see these as tuition increases for the kids across the state who are least able to afford it. Since 1996, counties have been filling in the gap up until 2 years ago when we finally got to CAID. So yeah, there are a lot of big numbers over the past few years, but that's because we finally got there. But we're not going to be able to backfill. These are going to be tuition increases, and I want everyone to please know that. The second thing is equity. When you further cut the formula away from the four-year schools, you're signaling that you're prioritizing one segment over another. I know that's not what this committee wants to do. You've been champions for community colleges, but to do that and in perpetuity sends the wrong message. Number two, highway user revenue. I was really hoping I wouldn't have to be in here for a few more years talking about this. The BRFA now cuts over $350 million from Baltimore City, over $300 million for the remaining 23 counties. I don't know what we're supposed to do. We're counting on that. We have to fund the blueprint. I don't know what Baltimore City is supposed to do. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money for the counties too. So please, we would urge you to take a look at that. You don't need to cut highway user in 26, 27. It has no effect on the general fund. It's not in spending affordability. Let's wait for train and then come back and look at it. Once we have a larger set of recommendations, there's no reason to do that right now. The third issue, health funding. I know you heard about this in a budget briefing. I know that there's been an agreement to study the core health funding formula and other money that goes to the counties, but unless you put something in the BRFA before that study happens, we're going to be hit with a huge surprise, big numbers in local matches that counties are not expecting. I don't think that's the way it's intended to be. There's an agreement to look at it, but in the meantime, we need some language in the BRFA to prevent those massive increases. So again, please take a hard look at CADE, highway user, and the health funding formula. And with that, we'd ask for a favorable with amendments.
Thank you. Questions for this panel? Senator Stallings?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to brag a little bit on Holly. I've known her and her family for a very long time. And of course, she says she's from the 6th district, which of course I'm proud, but she's proud of, but I'm going to just say you did a great job. And, you know, I understand it's going to be a hard time with something like this, but and I know how hard you work to be in this therapy and this practice, and balancing a budget is a tough thing as we are trying to work on, but we're going to do all that we can to see what we can work out with. But I'm going to thank you. And I want to thank all of you for coming on. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go. So go back and see, is Mr. Patty here? Michael Patty. Lisa Klingenmeyer, Steve Wise, Ellen Valentino, Jack Malani, Matt Power, Yvonne Harper,
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Lisa Klingenmeyer. I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Rise, which works for an economy that works for all. We're here today in strong support of the Child Care Scholarship Program, and in that support, we're respectfully requesting an amendment to the BRFA to strike the provision that would allow the department to unilaterally institute wait lists in the Child Care Scholarship Program. We thank this committee for all the work you've done over the years on the Child Care Scholarship Program. That work has been meaningful, it's increased access to the program, and has made real differences in the lives of working Marylanders. We know there are budget challenges ahead, but we do not believe the Child Care Scholarship Program is where the state should be looking for cost savings and allowing the department to institute wait lists to this program, curtailing access to this program. We believe that wait lists are antithetical to our shared vision of ending childhood poverty and creating an economy that works for all. Instead of looking to safety net programs as ways to find cost savings and budget relief, we strongly urge the General Assembly and administration to have a conversation about bringing more revenue into the state so that we can fund all of the priorities that we want to fund as a state. Because if we are having these conversations this session when the budget isn't as bad about waitlists for the Child Care Scholarship Program, community colleges, self-directed care, what are the programs we're going to be talking about next year when the budget is even worse? I'm a social worker by training. I got started in this work in casework, and the reason I do advocacy now instead of casework is it was heartbreaking working with families and not being able to get them the services they need because of barriers they were facing, barriers like wait lists. We thank this committee over the years for the work that you have done to increase access to safety net programs, and in that shared work, we ask you to please strike the provisions in the BRFA that would allow a wait list for the Child Care Scholarship Program. Thank you for your time.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Ellen Valentino. I'm here representing the Mid-Atlantic Petroleum Distributors Association. That's the association that represents convenience stores and service station operators. And again, just want to ask the committee to restore the cuts on the lottery commission, both on the commission and the sales. I mean, I know you're going to hear from some small businesses. I think their testimony should speak for the industry themselves. So thank you. And I hope you have an opportunity to restore that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Steve Wise here today representing the Licensed Beverage Association. So these are the licensed beverage retailers that are also lottery retailers. And you've heard from Mr. Parikh, Mr. McCauley, and now Ms. Valentino. So I'm not going to add to that, but I would, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask your indulgence. There's quite a few members of the audience here who didn't sign up because we wanted to be respectful of your time, but if you might be willing to let them stand. And then there's also dozens more out in the hallway who are just here for moral support. Okay. Yeah. No, just stand. Yeah. Most of them in the hallway, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
We appreciate everybody coming down.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, Matt Power, President of MICUA. The General Assembly saw the importance of linking funding for nonprofit and public institutions of higher education over 50 years ago. The thinking was that to create the workforce Maryland needs and the opportunities for Maryland residents they desire, the state needs healthy public and nonprofit institutions. This dual system of education worked so successfully that 20 years later, the General Assembly created the CADE formula to establish a true ecosystem of higher education with linked funding to create access, opportunity, and
Just want to acknowledge their presence. They came down, obviously. There's a bunch of them. Thanks for coming down. We appreciate you coming down and expressing your views, even with your presence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
no problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, to create access, opportunity, and affordability for all Marylanders. The state has consistently championed Maryland's 55% degree production goal. After 10 years, we failed to meet it. We're about to set an even bolder goal, and yet we're cutting funding for Selinger and CADE. Does that make sense to anyone? MICUA supports the blueprint for Maryland education. We produce 50% of the Maryland education degrees at or above the baccalaureate level. Selinger is the reason that we're able to do this because it lets us provide teachers additional financial aid. Who is going to implement the blueprint without the teacher candidates it requires? We do recognize the fiscal realities you're facing, and we're willing to help. But a 50% cut distributed amongst our anchor institutions in a completely random and scattershot fashion doesn't make sense. The way the formula was run is inequitable for our institutions. The Selinger program is 0.2% of the budget, yet we are by far the single largest cut to any program in the BRFA. We ask you to accept our counter proposal in our testimony. Number one, run the formula in the fair and equitable way in which it was designed and has been run for the last 50 years. Number two, adopt language in the BRFA that limits any one institution from receiving more than 35% of the Selinger allocation. Our counter proposal reduces the Selinger program by nearly 20%. If every other entity that testifies at this table today or in their budget hearings was willing to accept a 20% reduction of the program, none of you would be losing sleep trying to balance extremely worthy and competing priorities. We know that your jobs aren't easy. We are willing to do our fair share, but please make it fair and make it equitable among our institutions. We're trying to work with you. Please work with us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Gazon, Vice Chair Rosenpep, and distinguished members of the Budget and Taxation Committee. I'm Yvonne Harper on behalf of Maryland Occupational Therapists Association, which you heard from them just a brief minutes ago. And I think they covered a lot of the bases as far as funding and as far as the percentage that they're losing. What I think I want to highlight right now is about the building and operational aspect of things. So they've been housed in different places throughout the last few years, and they've been having to move, which I think that's not a stable situation to be in ever. So at first they were in the state complex in Baltimore on Preston Street. They were then advised to move because that closed. They then were moved to Spring Grove, which the health department had advised them to leave because of black mold throughout the facility, which is not healthy for anyone. So they moved, and now they've been operating in a virtual setting, which a virtual setting is okay if you're working from home, but as an occupational therapist, how do you do that and still be effective? And so that would be an additional cost where they would have to then get different real estate, which would be more of a commercial real estate, a higher budget, and from the percentage of what is dropped into the 68% that they are now receiving from the state, when we are housed with the $776,000, I think that's the biggest problem here. Like, where do we house them outside of everything that everyone else has said before? So I am in favor of this, but with a supportive amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for this panel? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine Cooper, Jermaine Williams, Margaret Carter, Ellen Jennings, Beth Good, Brad Phillips.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, full committee. My name is actually Ann Jasselman and I live in Howard County. You called Kathy Cooper and she has asked me to give this testimony on her behalf because she and another mom that were here had to leave because their children were very ill. So I'm here today from Hartford County to ask that the Self-Direction Act remain intact, a law that my husband, my daughter, and I favorably testified for in 2022. I'm here today on behalf of Melanie, our 38-year-old daughter, who has been a participant in self-direction for 18 years, basically since the waiver's inception. The change proposed are drastic and would reverse a major provision in individual and family-directed goods and services. The spending does not add additional funds. It simply allows an individual to access their present funding. I ask you to consider this idea. Day-to-day administrative costs, which are presently bunched together in individual and family-directed goods and services, might be moved to a special line item in the fiscal management piece of the budget, not into individual family-directed goods and services. We ask you not to pass this measure without more input from the stakeholders. For 18 years in self-direction, there was no such compensation for day-to-day administration, the work of hiring staff, scheduling shifts, scheduling training, additional budget issues, meeting with coordinators, nurses, support brokers, ordering medical supplies and medication, all were done for free. These things for most folks, often by parents. Only since July of 2023 has there ever been compensation for the day-to-day administrative hours. It is not only fair, but I am 69 years old and it's not as if, but it will be soon that my husband and I would no longer be able to handle these. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like?
Hi, my name is Meg Carter. I'm a volunteer with the Self-Directed Advocacy Network of Maryland. And there are a lot of self-directed people here today who came to testify. I could ask people to raise their hands if that would be okay.
Sure.
So anyway, I am also.
Everybody, glad you're here.
Yeah, they've been wonderful. I'm also the parent of Lucy Carter, who's been self-directing her services for 14 years. I believe there are serious flaws in the new methodologies and the assumptions made by those with fresh eyes who are reviewing data about self-direction for MDH. Placing a cap on IFDGS would absolutely prevent many people who self-direct from accessing their allocated funding. It is an attack on parity, a principle enshrined in the Self-Direction Act. Parity means that people who self-direct must be allocated the same funding they would receive if they were accessing traditional services. People who self-direct must already fund their individual and family-directed goods and services from savings in their budgets. No additional funding is available to them. By placing a cap on IFDGS, MDH is also placing a significant portion of the participants' allocated funding out of reach. Please adjust the BRFA to leave the Self-Direction Act intact.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the chairman, vice chairman, and members of the committee. I am Beth Goody. I'm a resident, lifelong resident of Montgomery County. My daughter has received self-directed services for a little more than 8 years, and she is also a resident of Montgomery County. You have my written testimony. I appreciate you taking the time to take a look at it. I think over the course of the past week or so, when this BRFA language was brought to our attention, there's been a lot of discussion about what people understand, don't understand. There's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of language. There's the DDA approved budget, there's the SDS approved budget. Do we call it savings? Do we call it unallocated? I think the point is, number one, that stakeholders were not brought into this conversation at all. And there had previously been with SDAN some good communication with the department, and this came as a shock. So the self-directed, the SD Act of 2022 removed the IFDGS cap, partly because of the addition of the day-to-day administrator, which the department wanted to put into that category. We can't have a position or hours or wages for an individual who's going to sort of take over the role of that parents currently have with $5,000. So when we look at budgets, I've got 26 seconds. I would really appreciate the opportunity to talk in depth, get in the weeds about how budgets are developed. What does it mean for these unallocated funds? How is that different from residential services? And would strongly suggest that since there's not been time to collect data or real research on how to reduce these funds, that a work group be established to look at these issues and bring this issue back forward next year. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Ellen Jennings. I'm from Montgomery County, and I have a 29-year-old son with autism, a seizure disorder, and an autonomic disorder. Until a year and a half ago, all of Nick's services were delivered through the traditional service model using DDA-funded agencies. This worked, while he still lived at home, a period of time that was basically an extension of his childhood. But Nick is now a grown-up, and he wants to live on his own as independently as possible. Thus, a few years ago, he moved into an apartment. Of course, this was only possible for him with significant personal supports, and it soon became clear that a traditional DDA-funded agency could not be relied upon to provide adequate or consistent support staff for Nick. In short, we were told agencies couldn't retain enough staff to meet the amount of service hours for which Nick qualified. Thus, a year and a half ago, we switched to self-directed services. This model allows us to hire, train, and retain staff ourselves, paying them a decent wage so they'll show up and stick around. This model has worked wonderfully for Nick and makes it possible for him to live on his own. But, yes, there's a but, it immediately became clear that Nick's staff, schedule, bureaucratic paperwork, activities, therapies, etc., would require hours and hours of my or someone else's time to coordinate each week. And I didn't see how this could possibly be sustained. The good news is that last summer, the DDA acknowledged this problem and approved a day-to-day administrator role for individuals who use self-directed services. Without this day-to-day administrator, it would be impossible for most disabled individuals to continue utilizing the self-directed services model. Of course, as Nick's mom, I could choose to do this work without pay as I have for his entire life, but I'm not immortal, and whether I die today or 30 years from now, I won't always be part of the picture. My request, as you've heard from others, is that you make no changes to the Self-Directed Services Act of 2022 and that you form a work group to study the differences so that you understand how they compare and how the funding works. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chairs, members of the Budget and Taxation Committee. My name is Brad Phillips. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Association of Community Colleges, and I'm here on behalf of the 15 Cade community colleges to ask respectfully that you reject the recommendations in the BRFA that would cut 22 million from our funding, and to also reject the permanent reduction in the percentage tie that would reduce the state's obligation from 29 cents for every dollar given to our public four-year institutions to 26.5 cents. Maryland's method of funding higher education is underappreciated and often misunderstood, but it establishes a funding link between all segments. It is a policy that is based in equitable funding strategy that provides necessary resources to students who attend community colleges, will have the quality education at an affordable rate that prepares them for the workforce or for transferring to a four-year institution. This cut, however, would do long-term damage. Just the next 5 years alone, the reduction would be 140 million, according to the Department of Legislative Services. In fact, within 6 years, the BRFA would reduce Cade funding more than the total amount cut from the formula over the past 27 years of its entire history. What drives the formula is what the state provides to our public universities, yet somehow community colleges are the only segment that is being described as if we are getting an increase that is out of sync. Yes, during the past 4 years, which were some of the most challenging years for community colleges nationwide and in our history, we did lose enrollment, but we still have been able to help more students complete thanks to the support through Cade, which is really the success story that is getting lost. And now our enrollment is the fastest growing in the state. I'd be the first to admit it's terrible when you cannot get into a highly selective institution. It's equally as terrible when they cannot get into a moderately selective institution, but it is tragic when a student cannot afford to enroll in a community college because he has nowhere else to go. To me, that is the most harmful aspect of the BRFA. With all the gains that we have made in the state to help address racial disparities leading to equity, the proposal does the most damage to economically disadvantaged students with the greatest educational needs. Thank you. Oh, may I take a moment to introduce some of the presidents that are here as well. We have with us Dawn Lindsay, from president of Anne Arundel Community College. We have Dr. Cliff Coppersmith, who is the president of Chesapeake College. We also have the chair of the board for Chesapeake College, Reza Jafari. We also have the president of Carroll Community College, Jim Ball, and the incoming president, Dr. Rose Mintz, coming in for the presidency at Carroll Community College. And of course, we have Jermaine Williams from Montgomery College as well.
Good afternoon, Jermaine Williams, President, Montgomery College. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to speak today. And thank you for everything you do each and every day for Marylanders. And a special thank you to Senator Zucker and Senator King. You are absolutely honorary Raptors. I know each of you believe in the work that we do because we open doors to opportunity for Marylanders and deliver homegrown talent for Maryland. So please reject the changes to the Cade funding formula outlined in the BRFA. The reduction from 29 cents on the dollar to 26.5 and the elimination of the hold harmless clause are particularly concerning. Instead, please invest, right? Invest in homegrown talent. Nearly 80% of MC alumni stay in Montgomery County. They are the nurses at Holy Cross Germantown Hospital, engineers at NIST, and biotech manufacturing associates at GlaxoSmithKline. Invest in affordability. Our students pay their fair share, and too many Marylanders still struggle to afford tuition. With Cade dollars, MC can continue with our current plan to keep tuition flat for the third year of the past 4 years. Invest in impact and equity. As you heard, our enrollment is going up. At Montgomery College, our fall enrollment is up 4% from last fall and up 5% over spring. Our more than 40,000 students across 3 campuses are extremely diverse, with our largest cohorts identifying as Black and Hispanic. In fact, we are the only Hispanic serving institution as identified by the Department of Education in the state of Maryland. Invest in our students. Today, programs outside the classrooms are as important as what happens inside a classroom. You envision such equitable and student-centered strategies in the 2013 College Completion Act. So please continue to invest in the promise of every student. And finally, please invest in our faculty and staff. They help us provide them with fair and reasonable compensation to our employees. They help make dreams come true every day. Instead of once again debating the Cade formula, invest in your community's college. Let's work together to keep Maryland thriving. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for this panel? Thank you very much. Dawn Lindsay, Waja Jamal, Michelle Goyton, Karen Bowers, Hardik Mehta. Okay, come on up, and whoever's got a mic, you can begin.
I guess that's me. Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Bowers. I live in Hagerstown, Maryland. My daughter Jennifer is 33 and she has multiple and severe disabilities. She graduated from high school in 2012 and directly entered into the self-direction program in the Community Pathways Waiver. In the last 12 years, her 7 staff and 5 vendors have put together an amazing program for her that's highly individualized and person-centered. It's really an amazing feat. But what about the future? What will happen in the future when I am not here, which is a certainty, and where do we go from there? I am the engine of the whole process. And this is why I was so excited when the Self-Direction Act of 2022 came along, because it presented an opportunity for sustainability for our self-directed participants. When I'm gone, who runs the show? Who keeps everything moving? So this is what I'm concerned about. And individual directed goods and services is wonderful because we have the opportunity to hire a day-to-day administrator to do many of the things that I'm doing for free and have been doing for free for many years. We're so excited about it. We've already started trying to hire. We posted the ad on Indeed. We have a job description. We are currently interviewing because this money is in our budget now and we are ready for help now. So that's what's happening in the real world. In addition, individual directed goods and services also gives you the possibility of tweaking and adding more unique services to the plan, as recommended, for example, by our behavior specialists, certain classes to assist with certain types of issues. And it's working. Without the funds, it will not work. So please leave the Self-Direction Act of 2022 in place with further study. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Dawn Lindsay. I'm president of Anne Arundel Community College. I'm here to talk about the dramatic impact of altering the CADE formula. For the past 2 years, CADE was fully funded, and during that time, community college enrollments increased. At Anne Arundel Community College, our fall enrollment increased by 7.8%, and this spring enrollment is up 7%. Altering the CADE formula in this time of growth greatly affects our ability to provide our students, the support they need. Community college students are among the most vulnerable in higher education. We serve thousands of traditional age students each year, but our average student is a 26-year-old part-time student, female. Many of our students are trying to balance work and family obligations in addition to going to school. Others can't attend college at all. Community colleges share the governor's vision of addressing poverty. In fact, we are part of the solution. In order to address poverty, we need to make sure that people have sustaining employment, and we are the workforce engines for the counties that we serve. We train people for the skills they need to get back into the workforce. Providing a high quality and affordable education also means having the support services in place, which is crucial for student success. This includes things like advising, financial aid, tutoring, disability support, basic needs, etc. It is difficult to understand why our 4-year public institutions are receiving funds for a 5% compensation increase when my college is actually asking for a $1.9 million cut, which is a real cut. We rely on the state as one of our key partners. Increases in tuition can only impact our students' ability to attend college. When the CADE formula was funded, the state supported equitable access to higher education for everyone in Maryland. Rebasing this formula is going to create more inequity and prioritizing one segment over the other. On behalf of the Anne Arundel Community College Board and my community college colleagues, we respectfully request that you maintain the 29% funding per FTES and reject the language of the BRFA, especially the cuts in perpetuity. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Goitom. I'm a small business owner. I have a store on Baltimore City, and also I'm ex-cab or support agent for the lottery. Support agents means we cash it until 5,000. My income 70% is from lottery commission. That's why I'm here today to say no for Bill HB 362, because at this time the cost of life has hit to the roof. The minimum wage was increased, the rent was increased, the food cost was increased, everything was increased. Even the minimum wage is 15 an hour. I pay to my employees more than minimum wage because the minimum wage, my employees they can survive. They can survive. Apartment rent was about 30% was increased. Since the COVID until now, since COVID until now, I struggle with the financial crisis. I understand this committee trying to arrange the budget, but this time was the worst time is to cut the commission. This bill gonna be hurt the small business owners, not the big corporations. Thank you for listening.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Hardik Mehta. I am representing Asian American Retailers Association of Maryland. I'm talking to you on behalf of 500+ members. Especially, we definitely support the bill, but we would like to request an amendment in the lottery bill. Maryland State have always been great to us retailers, and that's why me and my family and my fellow other retailers have settled in this wonderful state of Maryland. And we are here as a small business owners, and from the committee, we wanted to let you know that before voting yes or no against this bill, please have some things that in consideration. There are actually more than 4,500 lottery agents in the state of Maryland, out of which 10%, around 440 members are ex-cap members, retailers. Ex-cap retailers contribute to total of $22 million in commission. We're taking 0.5% out of them. That's $1.2 million we're taking from these retailers. And I'm just talking about these 440 ex-cap retailers. We are taking a significant chunk out of these retailers. These retailers take higher risks managing the cash for the Maryland State Lottery. Not only that, for the state of Maryland Lottery, we have to open a new account in the bank. It has to be a separate account, which involves bank charges. And as you know, nowadays, bank charges are significant. Majority bank charges are charging anywhere from $27 for a $100 bill. They count over 20,000 cash deposits. So $300 to $400 is another expense added to all these retailers. And that adds to an extra labor cost and everything else, in spite of giving all the increases in the rent and everything. And one of the fellow members said that, this reduction of the bill will provide us and state of Maryland to be as close as we can be to the neighboring state. But they forgot to mention the neighboring states, the hourly wage in Virginia is $12, Delaware is $13.25, and Pennsylvania is $11. We are at $15. We cannot afford any more reduction in our bills. So on behalf of all the members that are here, I please request that you please say no to this bill and help the small businesses stay afloat in the state of Maryland. Thank you so very much for listening.
Thank you. Questions for this panel? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Laura Wheeldwyer, Carol Custer, And that's all I have for signed up today. I have a couple online. Was you signed up? Okay.
Thank you, Chair Gazzoni and committee members. I'm Laura Wheeldryer. I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Family Network, which is a statewide nonprofit child advocacy organization. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm really here to talk to you about page 8 and 9 of the BRFA, which is all about child care scholarship. And I hope we're all on the same page when I say child care scholarship is an investment in our children, our families, our providers, and really in the future of the state of Maryland. And the 2024 BRFA would essentially repeal the core of legislation enacted by the General Assembly just last year. It would reassert unilateral authority for MSD to impose an enrollment freeze and reestablish a waiting list. And if you just think back to a year ago, there was actually a very compelling reason why the General Assembly chose to enact this legislation in 2023. And that reason is quite simply the recent history of this program. I'll just tick through a few highlights. Poor budget and enrollment projections. The last time there was an enrollment freeze in 2011, it lasted 7 long years, during which over 20,000 children languished, eligible children languished on that wait list. And at the same time, between FY 16 and 18, MSD underspent by more than $55 million the funds that the General Assembly had appropriated for child care scholarship. So enrollment freezes are, as you can probably guess, profoundly destructive. They're destructive for individual families, for children, for childcare providers, and for the program as a whole. They shake the public's confidence in being able to rely on a program that allows families to work while their children receive high quality care. So I urge you to maintain direct oversight to prevent disruptive enrollment freezes, and respectfully urge the committee to strike page 8, line 25 through page 9, line 23. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Carol Custer. I'm the Secretary of the Self-Directed Advocacy Network, and I'm speaking on behalf of Matt Rice, who is with People on the Go because he could not be here today. I will not speak as good as him, but I'll do the best I can. We have an unfavorable view of the BRFA because of the amendments it's making to the Self-Direction Act. That act was passed just 2 years ago with a unanimous vote in the House and the Senate after a 7-month work group with delegates, Senator Lee, who was the Senate sponsor at the time, and multiple stakeholders and community experts, like from CMS. We had people there from CMS. This bill was a result of that. And the bill has always been about access to the budget, not an increase in the budget. IFTGS funds currently include what are actually administrative and program costs. And in our written testimony that we shared with People on the Go, it shows you that those are in the rate. This is funding that is in the rate that these individuals need for the sustainability, which is a very major concern as the population ages and the parents are aging. If these people were not in self-direction, they might be able to get into a traditional provider, but provider capacity is not great right now from the pandemic and DSP shortages. The only alternative, if we don't get a sustainable program with this administrative position, would be an institution. Self-direction gives people a chance to direct their own lives. They are the boss. They are the center of the program. We want to make sure that that continues as an option and that its funding continues to be the same as the other service model, which is traditional and provider organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for this panel? Thank you very much. We have some folks on virtual. Nick, you're up.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Mr. Chair and esteemed senators, on behalf of the Greater Baltimore Committee, I urge you to amend 2 aspects of the BRFA to renew Maryland's support for 2 crucial elements of our economic competitiveness: The first is community colleges. The BRFA would cut $22 million from projected funding and permanently rebase that funding moving forward, after legislators, educators, and advocates fought for and won full 29% CADE funding in just the last 2 years. Our community colleges are crucial to equitable economic development, workforce development, and regional competitiveness. This cut would create greater workforce shortages, especially in the areas of cybersecurity, transportation, and healthcare. Without this funding, students, many of whom are low income, will bear the burden. Cutting this funding at this moment in time is directly in contradiction with the governor's commitment to leaving no one behind. Number two, highway user revenue. The BRFA would cause a draconian cut to Baltimore City's HUR funding of at least $60 million in each of FY 26 and 27. And to make matters worse, DLS is recommending an even more arbitrary cut that would cripple Baltimore City's infrastructure funding for years to come. This must be rejected outright. As the governor has said, this cannot be Maryland's decade unless it is also Baltimore's time. These cuts are directly in contradiction with that mission, as Baltimore City's crumbling infrastructure harms current businesses and current residents, slows the progress of every new physical development, and harms the competitiveness of our region for future opportunities. Now is the time to invest in Baltimore and to stop the generations of disinvestment that previous administrations oversaw. I sincerely ask you to amend the BRFA to remove the $22 million cut to our community colleges and the $120 million in cuts to Baltimore's HUR funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry Potter.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Larry Porter.
Sorry, my eyes are
That's
getting older,
fine.
I guess.
That's fine. I am Vice President of the Caroline County Commissioners, and I'm here today to speak in support of Senate Bill 362 with amendments. I'd like to particularly talk about the Disparity Grant Program, which provides non-categorical state aid to low-wealth jurisdictions. It promotes equity across jurisdictions to overcome disparate tax bases, ensuring the counties which rely on local income taxes for substantial revenue can generate sufficient yield to fund schools, public health, public safety, roadway maintenance, and other essential community services. This year, the variability in the program, largely arising from the volatility in non-wage income as part of this year-by-year formula, triggers a funding cut of $31 million for fiscal year 2025, including a $615,000 cut for our county. Now, that might not seem like a big deal for a lot of people, but it is for us. In fact, our disparity grant, combined with the new blueprint number of 1.7 million, is equal to about 8 cents to an 8 cent property tax increase, just to offset that number. We know that these cuts are formula driven, but cuts are cuts, and we depend on the disparity grant here in Caroline County. We raised our local income tax rate to the maximum in an election year to maximize our disparity grant to build a new elementary school and sheriff's office. Cutting the disparity grant will disproportionately affect poor counties and exacerbate pressures at the local level by undermining county revenue structures and support for schools, transportation, public health, and other essential programs and services. We know the budget is tight, but we would respectfully request that you address the volatility of the disparity program. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Steve, any questions for that witness? Steve Bress.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and the committee for allowing me to speak this afternoon. My name is Steve Bress. I've been a resident of Maryland for more than 50 years. I urge you to vote unfavorably on SB 362. My son is on the DDA's Community Pathways Waiver and Self-Directed Services, of which IFDGS is one aspect. The current bill seeks to unnecessarily cut the allowed expenditures under his already approved budget. As I understand it, his budget will not change, but his choices as to what he can do with unused funds that are already allocated to him will be impaired. One of the features of the 2022 self-directed bill that was passed with unanimous support was that IFDGS funds could be used for a day-to-day administrator. Long-term, this is one of the most important features for SDS services. for the role of the day-to-day administrator is often taken on by a parent or guardian. While this can work initially, it is not a great long-term solution. The parent or guardian can be amazingly beneficial in helping to get the SDS program started, but at some point, those people are going to age out. I know this camera makes me look really, really young, but it doesn't work that way. So the ability to use IFDGS funds, which are already in the participant's budget, can be the difference between staying in self-directed or having no services at all. In the case of my son, there were no traditional model services available to him. We couldn't find any locally that were set up to handle those with a combination of behavioral and medical issues. He'd been kicked out of so many programs prior that his self-esteem has taken a serious hit. He was quite skeptical about trying anything new. Prior to starting self-directed, his world was getting smaller and smaller. With self-directed services, he is allowed to pick activities that suit his personality and medical needs, which is allowing him to get back into the community and start regaining some of the social skills that he lost. As an example, just last week, he chose 3 new-to-him activities out in the community, including karaoke. As a parent, I'd love to share the video with you, but I understand I'm out of time. So please vote unfavorably on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Bress? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
John, you're up. You're muted.
Yep.
You're muted.
Okay. I think I'm unmuted now. Okay. Thank you. My name is John Diddy, professor of political science at the community colleges of Baltimore County. I'm asking today for 2 requests. First, to restore the funding in the budget for the CAID formula. Second, to restore the prescription drug coverage for retired state employees. Both items Governor Hogan fully funded. Budget Secretary Grady, a graduate of Harvard and former Hopkins employee, claims that the 16 community colleges don't need that much money. Community colleges have had similar decreases in enrollment as the universities, but the universities are getting a budget increase. And that doesn't make any sense. The university system only serves about 160,000 students. Community colleges serve over 330,000 students. CCBC is faced with almost a $5 million budget cut. Community colleges train more medical personnel and more people like dental hygienists and truck drivers than the university system does. The National Cyber Director, Harry Coker, recently visited CCBC to spotlight the best practices to grow the nation's cybersecurity workforce. I feel the budget secretary is uninformed about the benefits community colleges offer. When it comes to cuts, should we cut the cybersecurity program and endanger American national security? I think that would be awful. Community colleges in smaller jurisdictions are going to face even tougher decisions as far as what they're going to want to cut. I encourage restoring the CAID funding formula. In my testimony, I also attached letters that students wrote for encouraging this. Second, I'm asking you to restore funding for the prescription drug coverage over 50,000 Marylanders and retired state employees. No state has ever lost their AAA bond rating solely because of OPEB liability. This is essential. Fitch's agency even says that the ratings are based on the state's ability to pay and repay debt. Maryland's always been good at that. People ask why it's hard to train and hire state employees. When you take away benefits over time, they're not going to want to stay. Maryland is being left behind by these cuts. And frankly, these cuts is throwing grandma and her grandchildren from the train. It's a cold budget being balanced on the backs of economically disadvantaged people.
Thank you very much. Questions for this witness? Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Gentlemen, like to testify? Come on up. You can come right up to the mic.
He actually signed up, so we sent it as tonight.
Hello, I'm Thomas.
Hi, Thomas.
I want self-directed services. I want Jessica to work with me. I don't want to live in a group home. I want to do FIDO.
Hi, I'm Thomas's mom, and I have something growing on my larynx, and we're asking you to please vote unfavorable to the changes to the FDGS. We've actually been here since 12:30, and Thomas, as you see, is on the autism spectrum. He's also immune suppressed, so he has had his mask on, but he has been so good, and we've managed with medication to have him here so that he can speak, and you can see some of the real faces of people. We also have Sunny, and there's also some other, here. These are actually the faces of people that are receiving self-direction, and they were here for 4 hours today. I'm not from the community college. I'm not paid. I'm a volunteer. I'm a mom. Something I do want to say is I'm an only child, and I have nobody to take over as the admin when something happens to me. So that means Thomas goes into an institution, which actually will cost the state almost 3 times of what self-direction does. And under this day-to-day administrator, it should not be coming out of the individual family goods and services. Currently, individual goods and family services helps us supplement a nutritional need that he has. He is in musical autist, which he's supposed to be at right now at 4 p.m. It's on his letter. Something that he is able to do. And I just want to say, please reconsider. And when you look at this diagram here, the analysis of the FY 2025 Maryland executive budget for 2024, the diagram on page 11, you see that self-directed services is only 9%. We're the smallest percentage, but yet we're being picked on the most. Thank you for your time. Do you say thank you?
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job. Great job. Thanks for sticking around. Okay, that, from what I can tell, concludes our hearing for today. We appreciate everybody coming out. And committee, thank you.